Introduction. In giving to the world the record of what, looked at as an adventure only, is I suppose one of the most wonderful and mysterious experiences ever undergone by mortal men, I feel it incumbent on me to explain what my exact connection with it is. And so I may as well say at once that I am not the narrator, but only the editor of this extraordinary history, and then go on to tell how it found its way into my hands. Some years ago I, the editor, was stopping with a friend, vir doctissimus et amicus meus, at a certain university, which for the purposes of this history we will call Cambridge, and was one day much struck with the appearance of two persons whom I saw going arm in arm down the street. One of these gentlemen was, I think, without exception, the handsomest young fellow I have ever seen. He was very tall, very broad, and had a look of power and a grace of bearing that seemed as native to him as it is to a wild stag. In addition, his face was almost without flaw, a good face as well as a beautiful one, and when he lifted his hat, which he did just then to a passing lady, I saw that his head was covered with little golden curls growing close to the scalp. Good gracious! I said to my friend, with whom I was walking, why, that fellow looks like a statue of Apollo come to life. What a splendid man he is! Yes, he answered, he is the handsomest man in the university, and one of the nicest too. They call him the Greek god. But look at the other one, he's Vinces, that's the god's name, guardian, and supposed to be full of every kind of information. They call him Sharon. I looked, and found the older man quite as interesting in his way as the glorified specimen of humanity at his side. He appeared to be about 40 years of age, and was, I think, as ugly as his companion was handsome. To begin with, he was shortish, rather bow-legged, very deep-chested, and with unusually long arms. He had dark hair and small eyes, and the hair grew right down on his forehead, and his whiskers grew right up to his hair, so that there was uncommonly little of his countenance to be seen. Altogether he reminded me forcibly of a gorilla, and yet there was something very pleasing and genial about the man's eye. I remember saying that I should like to know him. All right, answered my friend, nothing easier. I know Vinci, I'll introduce you. And he did, and for some minutes we stood chatting, about the Zulu people I think, for I had just returned from the Cape at the time. Presently, however, a stoutish lady, whose name I do not remember, came along the pavement, accompanied by a pretty fair-haired girl, and these two Mr. Vinci, who clearly knew them well, at once joined, walking off in their company. I remember being rather amused because of the change in the expression of the elder man, whose name I discovered was Holly, when he saw the ladies advancing. He suddenly stopped short in his talk, cast a reproachful look at his companion, and with an abrupt nod to myself, turned and marched off alone across the street. I heard afterwards that he was popularly supposed to be as much afraid of a woman as most people are of a mad dog, which accounted for his precipitate retreat. I cannot say, however, that young Vinci showed much aversion to feminine society on this occasion. Indeed, I remember laughing, and remarking to my friend at the time that he was not the sort of man whom it would be desirable to introduce to the lady one was going to marry, since it was exceedingly probable that the acquaintance would end in a transfer of her affections. He was altogether too good-looking, and what is more, he had none of that consciousness and conceit about him which usually afflicts handsome men, and makes them deservedly disliked by their fellows. That same evening my visit came to an end, and this was the last I saw or heard of Sharon, and the Greek god, for many a long day. Indeed, I have never seen either of them from that hour to this, and do not think it probable that I shall. But a month ago I received a letter and 2 packets, one of manuscript, and on opening the first found that it was signed by Horace Holly, a name that at the moment was not familiar to me. It ran as follows. College, Cambridge, May 1st, 18. My dear sir, you will be surprised, considering the very slight nature of our acquaintance, to get a letter from me. Indeed, I think I had better begin by reminding you that we once met, now some 5 years ago, when I and my ward Leo Vinci were introduced to you in the street at Cambridge. To be brief and come to my business, I have recently read with much interest a book of yours describing a Central African adventure. I take it that this book is partly true, and partly an effort of the imagination. However this may be, it has given me an idea. It happens, how you will see in the accompanying manuscript, which together with the scarab, the royal son of the sun, and the original sherd, I am sending to you by hand, that my ward, or rather my adopted son Leo Vinci, and myself have recently passed through a real African adventure, of a nature so much more marvelous than the one which you describe, that to tell the truth I am almost ashamed to submit it to you lest you should disbelieve my tale. You will see it stated in this manuscript that I, or rather we, had made up our minds not to make this history public during our joint lives. Nor should we alter our determination were it not for a circumstance which has recently arisen. We are, for reasons that, after perusing this manuscript, you may be able to guess, going away again this time to Central Asia where, if anywhere upon this earth, wisdom is to be found, and we anticipate that our sojourn there will be a long one. Possibly we shall not return. Under these altered conditions it has become a question whether we are justified in withholding from the world an account of a phenomenon which we believe to be of unparalleled interest, merely because our private life is involved, or because we are afraid of ridicule and doubt being cast upon our statements. I hold one view about this matter, and Leo holds another, and finally, after much discussion, we have come to a compromise, namely, to send the history to you, giving you full leave to publish it if you think fit, the only stipulation being that you shall disguise our real names, and as much concerning our personal identity as is consistent with the maintenance of the bona fides of the narrative. And now what am I to say further? I really do not know beyond once more repeating that everything is described in the accompanying manuscript exactly as it happened. As regards she herself I have nothing to add. Day by day we gave greater occasion to regret that we did not better avail ourselves of our opportunities to obtain more information from that marvelous woman. Who was she? How did she first come to the caves of Kor? And what was her real religion? We never ascertained, and now, alas, we never shall, at least not yet. These and many other questions arise in my mind, but what is the good of asking them now? Will you undertake the task? We give you complete freedom, and as a reward you will, we believe, have the credit of presenting to the world the most wonderful history, as distinguished from romance, that its records can show. Read the manuscript, which I have copied out fairly for your benefit, and let me know. Believe me very truly yours, L. Horace Holly. 1. P.S. Of course, if any profit results from the sale of the writing should you care to undertake its publication, you can do what you like with it, but if there is a loss I will leave instructions with my lawyers, Messrs. Jeffrey and Jordan, to meet it. We entrust the sherd, the scarab, and the parchments to your keeping, till such time as we demand them back again. L.H. 1. This name is varied throughout in accordance with the writer's request. Editor. This letter, as may be imagined, astonished me considerably, but when I came to look at the MS, which the pressure of other work prevented me from doing for a fortnight, I was still more astonished, as I think the reader will be also, and at once made up my mind to press on with the matter. I wrote to this effect to Mr. Holly, but a week afterwards received a letter from that gentleman's lawyers, returning my own, with the information that their client and Mr. Leo Vinci had already left this country for Thibet, and they did not at present know their address. Well, that is all I have to say. Of the history itself the reader must judge. I give it him, with the exception of a very few alterations, made with the object of concealing the identity of the actors from the general public, exactly as it came to me. Personally, I have made up my mind to refrain from comments. At first I was inclined to believe that this history of a woman on whom, clothed in the majesty of her almost endless years, the shadow of eternity itself lay like the dark wing of night, was some gigantic allegory of which I could not catch the meaning. Then I thought that it might be a bold attempt to portray the possible results of practical immortality, informing the substance of a mortal who yet drew her strength from earth, and in whose human bosom passions yet rose and fell and beat as in the undying world around her the winds and the tides rise and fall and beat unceasingly. But as I went on I abandoned that idea also. To me the story seems to bear the stamp of truth upon its face. Its explanation I must leave to others, and with this slight preface, which circumstances make necessary, I introduce the world to Aisha and the caves of Kordat, the editor. P.S. There is on consideration one circumstance that, after a reperusal of this history, struck me with so much force that I cannot resist calling the attention of the reader to it. He will observe that so far as we are made acquainted with him there appears to be nothing in the character of Leo Vinci, which in the opinion of most people, would have been likely to attract an intellect so powerful as that of Aisha. He is not even, at any rate to my view, particularly interesting. Indeed, one might imagine that Mr. Holly would under ordinary circumstances have easily outstripped him in the favor of she. Can it be that extremes meet, and that the very excess and splendor of her mind led her by means of some strange physical reaction to worship at the shrine of matter? Was that ancient Callicrates nothing but a splendid animal loved for his hereditary Greek beauty? Or is the true explanation what I believe it to be, namely that Aisha, seeing further than we can see, perceived the germ and smoldering spark of greatness which lay hid within her lover's soul, and well knew that under the influence of her gift of life, watered by her wisdom, and shone upon with the sunshine of her presence, it would bloom like a flower and flash out like a star, filling the world with light and fragrance? Here also I am not able to answer, but must leave the reader to form his own judgment on the facts before him, as detailed by Mr. Holly in the following pages. My visitor. There are some events of which each circumstance and surrounding detail seems to be graven on the memory in such fashion that we cannot forget it. And so it is with the scene that I am about to describe. It rises as clearly before my mind at this moment as though it had happened but yesterday. It was in this very month something over 20 years ago that I, Ludwig Horace Holly, was sitting one night in my rooms at Cambridge, grinding away at some mathematical work. I forget what. I was to go up for my fellowship within a week, and was expected by my tutor and my college generally to distinguish myself. At last, wearied out, I flung my book down, and, going to the mantelpiece, took down a pipe and filled it. There was a candle burning on the mantelpiece, and a long, narrow glass at the back of it. And as I was in the act of lighting the pipe, I caught sight of my own countenance in the glass, and paused to reflect. The lighted match burnt away till it scorched my fingers, forcing me to drop it. But still I stood and stared at myself in the glass, and reflected. Well, I said aloud at last, it is to be hoped that I shall be able to do something with the inside of my head, for I shall certainly never do anything by the help of the outside. This remark will doubtless strike anybody who reads it as being slightly obscure, but I was in reality alluding to my physical deficiencies. Most men of 22 are endowed at any rate with some share of the comeliness of youth, but to me even this was denied. Short, thick-set, and deep-chested almost to deformity, with long sinewy arms, heavy features, deep-set gray eyes, a low brow half overgrown with a mop of thick black hair, like a deserted clearing on which the forest had once more begun to encroach. Such was my appearance nearly a quarter of a century ago, and such, with some modification, it is to this day. Like Cain, I was branded by nature with the stamp of abnormal ugliness, as I was gifted by nature with iron and abnormal strength and considerable intellectual powers. So ugly was I that the spruce young men of my college, though they were proud enough of my feats of endurance and physical prowess, did not even care to be seen walking with me. Was it wonderful that I was misanthropic and sullen? Was it wonderful that I brooded and worked alone, and had no friends, at least only one? I was set apart by nature to live alone, and draw comfort from her breast, and hers only. Women hated the sight of me. Only a week before I had heard one call me a monster, when she thought I was out of hearing, and say that I had converted her to the monkey theory. Once, indeed, a woman pretended to care for me, and I lavished all the pent-up affection of my nature upon her. Then money that was to have come to me went elsewhere, and she discarded me. I pleaded with her as I have never pleaded with any living creature before or since, for I was caught by her sweet face, and loved her. And in the end, by way of answer, she took me to the glass, and stood side by side with me, and looked into it. Now, she said, if I am beauty, who are you? That was when I was only 20. And so I stood and stared, and felt a sort of grim satisfaction in the sense of my own loneliness, for I had neither father nor mother nor brother. And as I did so there came a knock at my door. I listened before I went to open it, for it was nearly 12 o'clock at night, and I was in no mood to admit any stranger. I had but one friend in the college, or indeed in the world. Perhaps it was he. Just then the person outside the door coughed, and I hastened to open it, for I knew the cough. A tall man of about 30, with the remains of great personal beauty, came hurrying in, staggering beneath the weight of a massive iron box which he carried by a handle with his right hand. He placed the box upon the table, and then fell into an awful fit of coughing. He coughed and coughed till his face became quite purple, And at last he sank into a chair and began to spit up blood. I poured out some whiskey into a tumbler and gave it to him. He drank it, and seemed better, though his better was very bad indeed. "Why did you keep me standing there in the cold?" he asked pettishly. "You know the draughts are death to me." "I did not know who it was," I answered. "You are a late visitor." "Yes, and I verily believe it is my last visit," he answered, with a ghastly attempt at a smile. "I am done for, Holly. I am done for. I do not believe that I shall see tomorrow." "Nonsense," I said. "Let me go for a doctor." He waved me back imperiously with his hand. "It is sober sense, but I want no doctors. I have studied medicine and I know all about it. No doctors can help me. My last hour has come. For a year past I have only lived by a miracle. Now listen to me as you have never listened to anybody before. For you will not have the opportunity of getting me to repeat my words. We have been friends for 2 years. Now tell me, how much do you know about me? I know that you are rich, and have had a fancy to come to college long after the age that most men leave it. I know that you have been married, and that your wife died, and that you have been the best, indeed almost the only friend I ever had. Did you know that I have a son? No. I have. He is 5 years old. He cost me his mother's life, and I have never been able to bear to look upon his face in consequence. Holly, if you will accept the trust, I am going to leave you that boy's sole guardian." I sprang almost out of my chair. "Me," I said. "Yes, you. I have not studied you for 2 years for nothing. I have known for some time that I could not last. And since I realized the fact, I have been searching for someone to whom I could confide the boy in this." And he tapped the iron box. "You are the man, Holly. For like a rugged tree, you are hard and sound at core. Listen, the boy will be the only representative of one of the most ancient families in the world, that is, so far as families can be traced. You will laugh at me when I say it, but one day it will be proved to you beyond a doubt that my 65th or 66th lineal ancestor was an Egyptian priest of Isis, though he was himself of Grecian extraction, and was called Callicrates. His father was one of the Greek mercenaries raised by Haggard, a Mendesian pharaoh of the 29th dynasty, and his grandfather or great-grandfather, I believe, was that very Callicrates mentioned by Herodotus. In or about the year 339 before Christ, just at the time of the final fall of the pharaohs, this Callicrates, the priest, broke his vows of celibacy and fled from Egypt with a princess of royal blood who had fallen in love with him, and was finally wrecked upon the coast of Africa, somewhere, as I believe, in the neighborhood of where Delagoa Bay now is, or rather to the north of it, he and his wife being saved, and all the remainder of their company destroyed in one way or another. Here they endured great hardships, but were at last entertained by the mighty queen of a savage people, a white woman of peculiar loveliness, who, under circumstances which I cannot enter into, but which you will one day learn, if you live, from the contents of the box, finally murdered my ancestor Callicrates. His wife, however, escaped, how I know not, to Athens, bearing a child with her, whom she named Tisisthenes, or the mighty Avenger. 500 years or more afterwards, the family migrated to Rome under circumstances of which no trace remains, and here, probably with the idea of preserving the idea of vengeance which we find set out in the name of Tisisthenes, they appear to have pretty regularly assumed the cognomen of Vindex, or Avenger. Here, too, they remained for another 5 centuries or more, till about 770 AD, when Charlemagne invaded Lombardy, where they were then settled, whereon the head of the family seems to have attached himself to the great emperor, and to have returned with him across the Alps, and finally to have settled in Brittany. 8 generations later his lineal representative crossed to England in the reign of Edward the Confessor, and in the time of William the Conqueror was advanced to great honor and power. From that time to the present day, I can trace my descent without a break. Not that the Vincis, for that was the final corruption of the name after its bearers took root in English soil, have been particularly distinguished. They never came much to the fore. Sometimes they were soldiers, sometimes merchants, but on the whole they have preserved a dead level of respectability, and a still deader level of mediocrity. From the time of Charles II, till the beginning of the present century, they were merchants. About 1790 my grandfather made a considerable fortune out of brewing, and retired. In 1821 he died, and my father succeeded him, and dissipated most of the money. 10 years ago he died also, leaving me a net income of about 2,000 a year. Then it was that I undertook an expedition in connection with that. And he pointed to the iron chest, which ended disastrously enough. On my way back I traveled in the south of Europe, and finally reached Athens. There I met my beloved wife, who might well also have been called the Beautiful, like my old Greek ancestor. There I married her, and there a year afterwards, when my boy was born, she died. 1. The strong and beautiful, or more accurately, the beautiful in strength. 2. The Callicrates here referred to by my friend was a Spartan, spoken of by Herodotus, Herod. 9. 72, as being remarkable for his beauty. He fell at the glorious Battle of Plataea, September 22, BC 479, when the Lacedaemonians and Athenians under Pausanias routed the Persians, putting nearly 300,000 of them to the sword. The following is a translation of the passage. For Callicrates died out of the battle, he came to the army the most beautiful man of the Greeks of that day, not only of the Lacedaemonians themselves, but of the other Greeks also. He, when Pausanias was sacrificing, was wounded in the side by an arrow, and then they fought, but on being carried off he regretted his death, and said to Aramnestus, a Plataean, that he did not grieve at dying for Greece, but at not having struck a blow, or, although he desired so to do, performed any deed worthy of himself. This Callicrates, who appears to have been as brave as he was beautiful, is subsequently mentioned by Herodotus as having been buried among the Rhonuepsilon, young commanders, apart from the other Spartans and the Helots. L.H.H. He paused a while, his head sunk upon his hand, and then continued. My marriage had diverted me from a project which I cannot enter into now. I have no time, Holly, I have no time. One day, if you accept my trust, you will learn all about it. After my wife's death, I turned my mind to it again. But first it was necessary, or at least, I conceived that it was necessary, that I should attain to a perfect knowledge of Eastern dialects, especially Arabic. It was to facilitate my studies that I came here. Very soon, however, my disease developed itself, and now there is an end of me. And as though to emphasize his words, he burst into another terrible fit of coughing. I gave him some more whiskey, and after resting he went on. I have never seen my boy Leo, since he was a tiny baby. I never could bear to see him, but they tell me that he is a quick and handsome child. In this envelope, and he produced a letter from his pocket addressed to myself, I have jotted down the course I wish followed in the boy's education. It is a somewhat peculiar one. At any rate, I could not entrust it to a stranger. Once more, will you undertake it? I must first know what I am to undertake, I answered. You are to undertake to have the boy Leo, to live with you till he is 25 years of age, not to send him to school, remember. On his 25th birthday your guardianship will end, and you will then, with the keys that I give you now, and he placed them on the table, open the iron box and let him see and read the contents, and say whether or no he is willing to undertake the quest. There is no obligation on him to do so. Now as regards terms. My present income is 2,200 a year. Half of that income one have secured to you by will for life, contingently on your undertaking the guardianship. That is 1,000 a year remuneration to yourself, for you will have to give up your life to it, and 100 a year to pay for the board of the boy. The rest is to accumulate till Leo is 25, so that there may be a sum in hand should he wish to undertake the quest of which I spoke. And suppose I were to die? I asked. Then the boy must become a ward of chancery and take his chance. Only be careful that the iron chest is passed on to him by your will. Listen, Holly, don't refuse me. Believe me, this is to your advantage. You are not fit to mix with the world. It would only embitter you. In a few weeks you will become a fellow of your college, and the income that you will derive from that combined with what I have left you will enable you to live a life of learned leisure, alternated with the sport of which you are so fond, such as will exactly suit you. He paused and looked at me anxiously, but I still hesitated. The charge seemed so very strange. For my sake, Holly, we have been good friends, and I have no time to make other arrangements. Very well, I said. I will do it, provided there is nothing in this paper to make me change my mind. And I touched the envelope he had put upon the table by the keys. Thank you, Holly, thank you. There is nothing at all. Swear to me by God that you will be a father to the boy, and follow my directions to the letter." "I swear it," I answered solemnly. "Very well. Remember that perhaps one day I shall ask for the account of your oath, for though I am dead and forgotten, yet I shall live. There is no such thing as death, Holly, only a change, and as you may perhaps learn in time to come, I believe that even that change could under certain circumstances be indefinitely postponed." And again he broke into one of his dreadful fits of coughing. "There," he said. "I must go. You have the chest, and my will be found among my papers, under the authority of which the child will be handed over to you. You will be well paid, Holly, and I know that you are honest, but if you betray my trust, by heaven I will haunt you." I said nothing, being indeed too bewildered to speak. He held up the candle, and looked at his own face in the glass. It had been a beautiful face, but disease had wrecked it. "Food for the worms," he said. "Curious to think that in a few hours I shall be stiff and cold." The journey done, the little game played out. Ami Holly. Life is not worth the trouble of life, except when one is in love. At least mine has not been, but the boy Leo's may be if he has the courage and the faith. Goodbye, my friend. And with a sudden access of tenderness he flung his arm about me and kissed me on the forehead, and then turned to go. "Look here, Vincy," I said. "If you are as ill as you think, you had better let me fetch a doctor." "No, no," he said earnestly. "Promise me that you won't. I am going to die, and like a poisoned rat, I wish to die alone." "I don't believe that you are going to do anything of the sort," I answered. He smiled, and with the word "remember" on his lips, was gone. As for myself, I sat down and rubbed my eyes, wondering if I had been asleep. As this supposition would not bear investigation, I gave it up, and began to think that Vincy must have been drinking. I knew that he was and had been very ill, but still it seemed impossible that he could be in such a condition as to be able to know for certain that he would not outlive the night. Had he been so near dissolution, surely he would scarcely have been able to walk, and carry a heavy iron box with him. The whole story, on reflection, seemed to me utterly incredible, for I was not then old enough to be aware how many things happen in this world that the common sense of the average man would set down as so improbable as to be absolutely impossible. This is a fact that I have only recently mastered. Was it likely that a man would have a son 5 years of age whom he had never seen since he was a tiny infant? No. Was it likely that he could foretell his own death so accurately? No. Was it likely that he could trace his pedigree for more than 3 centuries before Christ, or that he would suddenly confide the absolute guardianship of his child, and leave half his fortune to a college friend? Most certainly not. Clearly Vincy was either drunk or mad. That being so, what did it mean? And what was in the sealed iron chest? The whole thing baffled and puzzled me to such an extent that at last I could stand it no longer, and determined to sleep over it. So I jumped up, and having put the keys and the letter that Vincy had left away into my dispatch box, and stowed the iron chest in a large portmanteau, I turned in, and was soon fast asleep. As it seemed to me, I had only been asleep for a few minutes when I was awakened by somebody calling me. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. It was broad daylight, 8 o'clock in fact. "Why, what is the matter with you, John?" I asked of the gyp who waited on Vincy and myself. "You look as though you had seen a ghost." "Yes, sir, and so I have," he answered. "Leastways I've seen a corpse, which is worse. I've been in to call Mr. Vincy as usual, and there he lies stark and dead." 2. The years roll by. As might be expected, poor Vincy's sudden death created a great stir in the college, but as he was known to be very ill, and a satisfactory doctor's certificate was forthcoming, there was no inquest. They were not so particular about inquests in those days as they are now. Indeed, they were generally disliked, because of the scandal. Under all these circumstances, being asked no questions, I did not feel called upon to volunteer any information about our interview on the night of Vincy's decease, beyond saying that he had come into my rooms to see me, as he often did. On the day of the funeral a lawyer came down from London, and followed my poor friend's remains to the grave, and then went back with his papers and effects, except, of course, the iron chest which had been left in my keeping. For a week after this I heard no more of the matter, and indeed, my attention was amply occupied in other ways, for I was up for my fellowship, a fact that had prevented me from attending the funeral or seeing the lawyer. At last, however, the examination was over, and I came back to my rooms and sank into an easy chair with the happy consciousness that I had got through it very fairly. Soon, however, my thoughts, relieved of the pressure that had crushed them into a single groove during the last few days, turned to the events of the night of poor Vincey's death. And again I asked myself what it all meant, and wondered if I should hear anything more of the matter, and if I did not, what it would be my duty to do with the curious iron chest. I sat there and thought till I began to grow quite disturbed over the whole occurrence. The mysterious midnight visit, the prophecy of death so shortly to be fulfilled, the solemn oath that I had taken, and which Vincey had called on me to answer to in another world than this. Had the man committed suicide? It looked like it. And what was the quest of which he spoke? The circumstances were uncanny, so much so that, though I am by no means nervous, or apt to be alarmed at anything that may seem to cross the bounds of the natural, I grew afraid, and began to wish I had nothing to do with them. How much more do I wish it now, over 20 years afterwards? As I sat and thought, there came a knock at the door, and a letter, in a big blue envelope, was brought in to me. I saw at a glance that it was a lawyer's letter, and an instinct told me that it was connected with my trust. The letter, which I still have, runs thus. Sir, our client, the late M.L. Vincey Esq., who died on the 9th instant in College, Cambridge, has left behind him a will, of which you will please find copy enclosed and of which we are the executors. Under this will you will perceive that you take a life interest in about half of the late Mr. Vincey's property, now invested in consols, subject to your acceptance of the guardianship of his only son, Leo Vincey, at present an infant, aged 5. Had we not ourselves drawn up the document in question in obedience to Mr. Vincey's clear and precise instructions, both personal and written, and had he not then assured us that he had very good reasons for what he was doing, we are bound to tell you that its provisions seem to us of so unusual a nature, that we should have felt bound to call the attention of the Court of Chancery to them, in order that such steps might be taken as seemed desirable to it, either by contesting the capacity of the testator or otherwise, to safeguard the interests of the infant. As it is, knowing that the testator was a gentleman of the highest intelligence and acumen, and that he has absolutely no relations living to whom he could have confided the guardianship of the child, we do not feel justified in taking this course. Awaiting such instructions as you please to send us as regards the delivery of the infant, and the payment of the proportion of the dividends due to you, we remain, sir, faithfully yours, Geoffrey and Jordan. Horace L. Hawley Esq. I put down the letter, and ran my eye through the will, which appeared, from its utter unintelligibility, to have been drawn on the strictest legal principles. So far as I could discover, however, it exactly bore out what my friend Vincey had told me on the night of his death. So it was true after all. I must take the boy. Suddenly I remembered the letter which Vincey had left with the chest. I fetched and opened it. It only contained such directions as he had already given to me as to opening the chest on Leo's 25th birthday, and laid down the outlines of the boy's education, which was to include Greek, the higher mathematics, and Arabic. At the end there was a postscript to the effect that if the boy died under the age of 25, which, however, he did not believe would be the case, I was to open the chest, and act on the information I obtained if I saw fit. If I did not see fit, I was to destroy all the contents. On no account was I to pass them on to a stranger. As this letter added nothing material to my knowledge, and certainly raised no further objection in my mind to entering on the task I had promised my dead friend to undertake, there was only one course open to me, namely, to write to Messrs. Geoffrey and Jordan, and express my acceptance of the trust, stating that I should be willing to commence my guardianship of Leo in 10 days' time. This done, I went to the authorities of my college, and having told them as much of the story as I considered desirable, which was not very much, after considerable difficulty succeeded in persuading them to stretch a point, and in the event of my having obtained a fellowship, which I was pretty certain I had done, allow me to have the child to live with me. Their consent, however, was only granted on the condition that I vacated my rooms in college and took lodgings. This I did, and with some difficulty succeeded in obtaining very good apartments quite close to the college gates. The next thing was to find a nurse, and on this point I came to a determination. I would have no woman to lord it over me about the child, and steal his affections from me. The boy was old enough to do without female assistance, so I set to work to hunt up a suitable male attendant. With some difficulty I succeeded in hiring a most respectable round-faced young man, who had been a helper in a hunting stable, but who said that he was one of a family of 17 and well accustomed to the ways of children, and professed himself quite willing to undertake the charge of Master Leo when he arrived. Then, having taken the iron box to town, and with my own hands deposited it at my banker's, I bought some books upon the health and management of children and read them, first to myself, and then aloud to Job, that was the young man's name, and waited. At length the child arrived in the charge of an elderly person, who wept bitterly at parting with him, and a beautiful boy he was. Indeed, I do not think that I ever saw such a perfect child before or since. His eyes were gray, his forehead was broad, and his face, even at that early age, clean-cut as a cameo, without being pinched or thin. But perhaps his most attractive point was his hair, which was pure gold in color and tightly curled over his shapely head. He cried a little when his nurse finally tore herself away and left him with us. Never shall I forget the scene. There he stood, with the sunlight from the window playing upon his golden curls, his fist screwed over one eye, whilst he took us in with the other. I was seated in a chair, and stretched out my hand to him to induce him to come to me, while Job in the corner was making a sort of clucking noise, which, arguing from his previous experience, or from the analogy of the hen, he judged would have a soothing effect, and inspire confidence in the youthful mind, and running a wooden horse of peculiar hideousness backwards and forwards in a way that was little short of inane. This went on for some minutes, and then all of a sudden the lad stretched out both his little arms and ran to me. "I like you," he said. "You is ugly, but you is good." 10 minutes afterwards he was eating large slices of bread and butter, with every sign of satisfaction. Job wanted to put jam onto them, but I sternly reminded him of the excellent works that we had read, and forbade it. In a very little while, for as I expected, I got my fellowship, the boy became the favorite of the whole college, where all orders and regulations to the contrary notwithstanding, he was continually in and out, a sort of chartered libertine, in whose favor all rules were relaxed. The offerings made at his shrine were simply without number, and I had serious difference of opinion with one old resident fellow, now long dead, who was usually supposed to be the crustiest man in the university, and to abhor the sight of a child. And yet I discovered, when a frequently recurring fit of sickness had forced Job to keep a strict lookout, that this unprincipled old man was in the habit of enticing the boy to his rooms, and there feeding him upon unlimited quantities of brandy balls, and making him promise to say nothing about it. Job told him that he ought to be ashamed of himself. At his age too, when he might have been a grandfather if he had done what was right, by which Job understood had got married, and thence arose the row. But I have no space to dwell upon those delightful years, around which memory still fondly hovers. One by one they went by, and as they passed we too grew dearer, and yet more dear to each other. Few sons have been loved as I love Leo, and few fathers know the deep and continuous affection that Leo bears to me. The child grew into the boy, and the boy into the young man, while one by one the remorseless years flew by, and as he grew and increased so did his beauty and the beauty of his mind grow with him. When he was about 15 they used to call him Beauty about the college, and me they nicknamed the Beast. Beauty and the Beast was what they called us when we went out walking together, as we used to do every day. Once Leo attacked a great strapping butcher's man, twice his size, because he sang it out after us, and thrashed him fairly. I walked on and pretended not to see, till the combat got too exciting, when I turned round and cheered him on to victory. It was the chaff of the college at the time, but I could not help it. Then when he was a little older the undergraduates found fresh names for us. They called me Sharon, and Leo the Greek god. I will pass over my own appellation with the humble remark that I was never handsome, and did not grow more so as I grew older. As for his, there was no doubt about its fitness. Leo at 21 might have stood for a statue of the youthful Apollo. I never saw anybody to touch him in looks, or anybody so absolutely unconscious of them. As for his mind, he was brilliant and keen-witted, but not a scholar. He had not the dullness necessary for that result. We followed out his father's instructions as regards his education strictly enough, and on the whole the results, especially in the matters of Greek and Arabic, were satisfactory. I learnt the latter language in order to help to teach it to him, but after 5 years of it he knew it as well as I did, almost as well as the professor who instructed us both. I always was a great sportsman. It is my one passion, and every autumn we went away somewhere shooting or fishing, sometimes to Scotland, sometimes to Norway, once even to Russia. I am a good shot, but even in this he learnt to excel me. When Leo was 18 I moved back into my rooms, and entered him at my own college, and at 21 he took his degree, a respectable degree but not a very high one. Then it was that I, for the first time, told him something of his own story, and of the mystery that loomed ahead. Of course he was very curious about it, and of course I explained to him that his curiosity could not be gratified at present. After that, to pass the time away, I suggested that he should get himself called to the bar. And this he did, reading at Cambridge, and only going up to London to eat his dinners. I had only one trouble about him, and that was that every young woman who came across him, or if not every one, nearly so, would insist on falling in love with him. Hence arose difficulties which I need not enter into here, though they were troublesome enough at the time. On the whole, he behaved fairly well. I cannot say more than that. And so the time went by till at last he reached his 25th birthday, at which date this strange and in some ways, awful history really begins. 3. The shirt of Aminarda's on the day preceding Leo's 25th birthday, we both journeyed to London, and extracted the mysterious chest from the bank where I had deposited it 20 years before. It was, I remember, brought up by the same clerk who had taken it down. He perfectly remembered having hidden it away. Had he not done so, he said, he should have had difficulty in finding it. It was so covered up with cobwebs. In the evening we returned with our precious burden to Cambridge, and I think that we might both of us have given away all the sleep we got that night, and not have been much the poorer. At daybreak Leo arrived in my room in a dressing gown, and suggested that we should at once proceed to business. I scouted the idea as showing an unworthy curiosity. The chest had waited 20 years, I said, so it could very well continue to wait until after breakfast. Accordingly at 9, an unusually sharp 9, we breakfasted, and so occupied was I with my own thoughts that I regret to state that I put a piece of bacon into Leo's tea in mistake for a lump of sugar. Job, too, to whom the contagion of excitement had, of course, spread, managed to break the handle off my Sevres china teacup, the identical one I believe that Marat had been drinking from just before he was stabbed in his bath. At last, however, breakfast was cleared away, and Job, at my request, fetched the chest, and placed it upon the table in a somewhat gingerly fashion, as though he mistrusted it. Then he prepared to leave the room. "Stop a moment, Job," I said. "If Mr. Leo has no objection, I should prefer to have an independent witness to this business, who can be relied upon to hold his tongue unless he is asked to speak." "Certainly, Uncle Horace," answered Leo, for I had brought him up to call me uncle, though he varied the appellation somewhat disrespectfully by calling me old fellow, or even my avuncular relative. Job touched his head, not having a hat on. "Lock the door, Job," I said, "and bring me my dispatch box." He obeyed, and from the box I took the keys that poor Vincy, Leo's father, had given me on the night of his death. There were 3 of them, the largest a comparatively modern key, the second an exceedingly ancient one, and the third entirely unlike anything of the sort that we had ever seen before, being fashioned apparently from a strip of solid silver, with a bar placed across to serve as a handle, and leaving some nicks cut in the edge of the bar. It was more like a model of an antediluvian railway key than anything else. "Now are you both ready?" I said, as people do when they are going to fire a mine. There was no answer, so I took the big key, rubbed some salad oil into the wards, and after 1 or 2 bad shots, for my hands were shaking, managed to fit it, and shoot the lock. Leo bent over and caught the massive lid in both his hands, and with an effort, for the hinges had rusted, forced it back. Its removal revealed another case covered with dust. This we extracted from the iron chest without any difficulty, and removed the accumulated filth of years from it with a clothes brush. It was, or appeared to be, of ebony, or some such close-grained black wood, and was bound in every direction with flat bands of iron. Its antiquity must have been extreme, for the dense heavy wood was in parts actually commencing to crumble from age. "Now for it," I said, inserting the second key. Job and Leo bent forward in breathless silence. The key turned, and I flung back the lid, and uttered an exclamation. And no wonder, for inside the ebony case was a magnificent silver casket, about 12 inches square by 8 high. It appeared to be of Egyptian workmanship, and the 4 legs were formed of sphinxes, and the dome-shaped cover was also surmounted by a sphinx. The casket was of course much tarnished and dinted with age, but otherwise in fairly sound condition. I drew it out and set it on the table, and then, in the midst of the most perfect silence, I inserted the strange-looking silver key, and pressed this way and that until at last the lock yielded, and the casket stood before us. It was filled to the brim with some brown shredded material, more like vegetable fiber than paper, the nature of which I have never been able to discover. This I carefully removed to the depth of some 3 inches, when I came to a letter enclosed in an ordinary modern-looking envelope, and addressed in the handwriting of my dead friend Vinci. To my son Leo, should he live to open this casket. I handed the letter to Leo, who glanced at the envelope, and then put it down upon the table, making a motion to me to go on emptying the casket. The next thing that I found was a parchment carefully rolled up. I unrolled it, and seeing that it was also in Vinci's handwriting, and headed, "Translation of the Uncial Greek writing on the potsherd," put it down by the letter. Then followed another ancient roll of parchment, that had become yellow and crinkled with the passage of years. This I also unrolled. It was likewise a translation of the same Greek original, but into black-letter Latin, which at the first glance from the style and character appeared to me to date from somewhere about the beginning of the 16th century. Immediately beneath this roll was something hard and heavy, wrapped up in yellow linen, and reposing upon another layer of the fibrous material. Slowly and carefully we unrolled the linen, exposing to view a very large but undoubtedly ancient potsherd of a dirty yellow color. This potsherd had, in my judgment, once been a part of an ordinary amphora of medium size. For the rest, it measured 10.5 inches in length by 7 in width, was about 1/4 of an inch thick, and densely covered on the convex side that lay towards the bottom of the box with writing in the later uncial Greek character, faded here and there, but for the most part perfectly legible, the inscription having evidently been executed with the greatest care, and by means of a reed pen, such as the ancients often used. I must not forget to mention that in some remote age this wonderful fragment had been broken in 2, and rejoined by means of cement and 8 long rivets. Also there were numerous inscriptions on the inner side, but these were of the most erratic character, and had clearly been made by different hands and in many different ages, and of them, together with the writings on the parchments, I shall have to speak presently. "Is there anything more?" asked Leo, in a kind of excited whisper. I groped about, and produced something hard, done up in a little linen bag. Out of the bag we took first a very beautiful miniature done upon ivory, and secondly, a small chocolate-colored composition scarabaeus, marked thus. Illustration. Symbols which we have since ascertained, mean Sutton Sera, which is being translated the royal son of Ra or the sun. The miniature was a picture of Leo's Greek mother, a lovely, dark-eyed creature. On the back of it was written, in poor Vinci's handwriting, "My beloved wife." "That is all," I said. "Very well," answered Leo, putting down the miniature, at which he had been gazing affectionately. "And now let us read the letter," and without further ado he broke the seal, and read aloud as follows. "My son Leo, when you open this, if you ever live to do so, you will have attained to manhood, and I shall have been long enough dead to be absolutely forgotten by nearly all who knew me. Yet in reading it remember that I have been, and for anything you know may still be, and that in it, through this link of pen and paper, I stretch out my hand to you across the gulf of death, and my voice speaks to you from the silence of the grave. Though I am dead, and no memory of me remains in your mind, yet am I with you in this hour that you read. Since your birth to this day I have scarcely seen your face. Forgive me this. Your life supplanted the life of one whom I loved better than women are often loved, and the bitterness of it endureth yet. Had I lived I should in time have conquered this foolish feeling, but I am not destined to live. My sufferings, physical and mental, are more than I can bear, and when such small arrangements as I have to make for your future well-being are completed, it is my intention to put a period to them. May God forgive me if I do wrong. At the best I could not live more than another year." "So he killed himself," I exclaimed. "I thought so. And now, Leo went on, without replying. Enough of myself. What has to be said belongs to you who live, not to me, who am dead, and almost as much forgotten as though I had never been. Holly, my friend, to whom, if he will accept the trust, it is my intention to confide you, will have told you something of the extraordinary antiquity of your race. In the contents of this casket you will find sufficient to prove it. The strange legend that you will find inscribed by your remote ancestress upon the potsherd was communicated to me by my father on his deathbed, and took a strong hold in my imagination. When I was only 19 years of age I determined, as to his misfortune, did one of our ancestors about the time of Elizabeth, to investigate its truth. Into all that befell me I cannot enter now, but this I saw with my own eyes. On the coast of Africa, in a hitherto unexplored region, some distance to the north of where the Zambesi falls into the sea, there is a headland, at the extremity of which a peak towers up, shaped like the head of a Negro, similar to that of which the writing speaks. I landed there, and learnt from a wandering native, who had been cast out by his people because of some crime which he had committed, that far inland are great mountains, shaped like cups, and caves surrounded by measureless swamps. I learnt also that the people there speak a dialect of Arabic, and are ruled over by a beautiful white woman who is seldom seen by them, but who is reported to have power over all things living and dead. 2 days after I had ascertained this, the man died of fever contracted in crossing the swamps, and I was forced by want of provisions and by symptoms of an illness which afterwards prostrated me to take to my dhow again. Of the adventures that befell me after this I need not now speak. I was wrecked upon the coast of Madagascar, and rescued some months afterwards by an English ship that brought me to Aden, whence I started for England, intending to prosecute my search as soon as I had made sufficient preparations. On my way I stopped in Greece, and there for omnia vincit amor. I met your beloved mother, and married her, and there you were born and she died. Then it was that my last illness seized me, and I returned hither to die. But still I hoped against hope, and set myself to work to learn Arabic, with the intention, should I ever get better, of returning to the coast of Africa, and solving the mystery of which the tradition has lived so many centuries in our family. But I have not got better, and so far as I am concerned, the story is at an end. For you, however, my son, it is not at an end, and to you I hand on these the results of my labor, together with the hereditary proofs of its origin. It is my intention to provide that they shall not be put into your hands until you have reached an age when you will be able to judge for yourself whether or no you will choose to investigate what, if it is true, must be the greatest mystery in the world, or to put it by as an idle fable, originating in the first place in a woman's disordered brain. I do not believe that it is a fable. I believe that if it can only be rediscovered there is a spot where the vital forces of the world visibly exist. Life exists. Why therefore should not the means of preserving it indefinitely exist also? But I have no wish to prejudice your mind about the matter. Read and judge for yourself. If you are inclined to undertake the search, I have so provided that you will not lack for means. If, on the other hand, you are satisfied that the whole thing is a chimera, then I adjure you, destroy the potsherd and the writings, and let a cause of troubling be removed from our race forever. Perhaps that will be wisest. The unknown is generally taken to be terrible, not as the proverb would infer, from the inherent superstition of man, but because it so often is terrible. He who would tamper with the vast and secret forces that animate the world may well fall a victim to them. And if the end were attained, if at last you emerged from the trial ever beautiful and ever young, defying time and evil, and lifted above the natural decay of flesh and intellect, who shall say that the awesome change would prove a happy one? Choose, my son, and may the power who rules all things, and who says, "Thus far shalt thou go, and thus much shalt thou learn," direct the choice to your own happiness and the happiness of the world, which, in the event of your success, you would one day certainly rule by the pure force of accumulated experience. Farewell. Thus the letter, which was unsigned and undated, abruptly ended. "What do you make of that, Uncle Holly?" said Leo, with a sort of gasp, as he replaced it on the table. "We have been looking for a mystery, and we certainly seem to have found one." "What do I make of it?" "Why, that your poor dear father was off his head, of course," I answered testily. "I guessed as much that night, 20 years ago, when he came into my room. You see, he evidently hurried his own end, poor man. It is absolute balderdash. That's it, sir, said Job solemnly. Job was a most matter-of-fact specimen of a matter-of-fact class. Well, let's see what the potsherd has to say at any rate, said Leo, taking up the translation in his father's writing and commencing to read. I am Anartes of the royal house of the pharaohs of Egypt, wife of Callicrates, the beautiful in strength, a priest of Isis whom the gods cherish and the demons obey, being about to die, to my little son Tisisthenes, the mighty avenger. I fled with thy father from Egypt in the days of Nectanebs. 1. Causing him through love to break the vows that he had vowed. We fled southward, across the waters, and we wandered for twice 12 moons on the coast of Libya, Africa, that looks towards the rising sun, where by a river is a great rock carven like the head of an Ethiopian. 4 days on the water from the mouth of a mighty river were we cast away, and some were drowned and some died of sickness. But us wild men took through wastes and marshes, where the sea-fowl hid the sky, bearing us 10 days' journey till we came to a hollow mountain, where a great city had been and fallen, and where there are caves of which no man hath seen the end. And they brought us to the queen of the people who place pots upon the heads of strangers, who is a magician having a knowledge of all things, and life and loveliness that does not die. And she cast eyes of love upon thy father, Callicrates, and would have slain me, and taken him to husband, but he loved me and feared her, and would not. Then did she take us, and lead us by terrible ways, by means of dark magic, to where the great pit is, in the mouth of which the old philosopher lay dead, and showed to us the rolling pillar of life that dies not, whereof the voice is as the voice of thunder. And she did stand in the flames and come forth unharmed, and yet more beautiful. Then did she swear to make thy father undying even as she is, if he would but slay me, and give himself to her. For me she could not slay because of the magic of my own people that I have, and that prevailed thus far against her. And he held his hand before his eyes to hide her beauty, and would not. Then in her rage did she smite him by her magic, and he died, but she wept over him, and bore him thence with lamentations, and being afraid, me she sent to the mouth of the great river where the ships come. And I was carried far away on the ships where I gave thee birth, and hither to Athens I came at last after many wanderings. Now I say to thee, my son, Tisisthenes, seek out the woman, and learn the secret of life, and if thou mayest find a way slay her, because of thy father Callicrates. And if thou dost fear or fail, this I say to all thy seed who come after thee, till at last a brave man be found among them who shall bathe in the fire and sit in the place of the pharaohs. I speak of those things, that though they be past belief, yet I have known, and I lie not. 1 Nectaneb or Nectanebo 2, the last native pharaoh of Egypt, fled from Achus to Ethiopia, BC 339. Editor. May the Lord forgive her for that, groaned Job, who had been listening to this marvelous composition with his mouth open. As for myself, I said nothing. My first idea being that my poor friend, being demented, had composed the whole thing, though it scarcely seemed likely that such a story could have been invented by anybody. It was too original. To solve my doubts I took up the potsherd and began to read the close uncial Greek writing on it. And very good Greek of the period it is, considering that it came from the pen of an Egyptian born. Here is an exact transcript of it. For general convenience in reading, I have here accurately transcribed this inscription into the cursive character. The English translation was, as I discovered on further investigation, and as the reader may easily see by comparison, both accurate and elegant. Besides the uncial writing on the convex side of the sherd at the top, painted in dull red, on what had once been the lip of the amphora, was the cartouche already mentioned as being on the scarabaeus, which we had also found in the casket. The hieroglyphics or symbols, however, were reversed, just as though they had been pressed on wax. Whether this was the cartouche of the original Callicrates, too, or of some prince or pharaoh from whom his wife Amenartes was descended, I am not sure, nor can I tell if it was drawn upon the sherd at the same time that the uncial Greek was inscribed, or copied on more recently from the scarab by some other member of the family. Nor was this all. At the foot of the writing, painted in the same dull red, was the faint outline of a somewhat rude drawing of the head and shoulders of a sphinx wearing 2 feathers, symbols of majesty, which, though common enough upon the effigies of sacred bulls and gods, I have never before met with on a sphinx. 2. The cartouche, if it be a true cartouche, cannot have been that of Callicrates, as Mr. Hawley suggests. Callicrates was a priest and not entitled to a cartouche, which was the prerogative of Egyptian royalty, though he might have inscribed his name or title upon an oval dot. Editor. Also on the right-hand side of this surface of the sherd, painted obliquely in red on the space not covered by the uncial characters, and signed in blue paint, was the following quaint inscription. In earth and ski and sea, strange things there be. Hoc facit. Dorothea Vinci. Perfectly bewildered, I turned the relic over. It was covered from top to bottom with notes and signatures in Greek, Latin and English. The first in uncial Greek was by Tisisthenes, the son to whom the writing was addressed. It was, I could not go. Tisisthenes to his son Callicrates. Here it is in facsimile with its cursive equivalent. This Callicrates, probably in the Greek fashion, so named after his grandfather, evidently made some attempt to start on the quest, for his entry written in very faint and almost illegible uncial is, I ceased from my going, the gods being against me. Callicrates to his son. Here it is also. Between these two ancient writings, the second of which was inscribed upside down and was so faint and worn that, had it not been for the transcript of it executed by Vinci, I should scarcely have been able to read it, since, owing to its having been written on that portion of the tile which had, in the course of ages, undergone the most handling, it was nearly rubbed out, was the bold, modern-looking signature of one Lionel Vinci, Etate Sua 17, which was written thereon I think by Leo's grandfather. To the right of this were the initials JBV, and below came a variety of Greek signatures, in uncial and cursive character, and what appeared to be some carelessly executed repetitions of the sentence Tau Pi Alpha Iota Delta, to my son, showing that the relic was religiously passed on from generation to generation. The next legible thing after the Greek signatures was the word Romi Auc, showing that the family had now migrated to Rome. Unfortunately, however, with the exception of its termination, Evi, the date of their settlement there is forever lost, for just where it had been placed a piece of the potsherd is broken away. Then followed 12 Latin signatures, jotted about here and there, wherever there was a space upon the tile suitable to their inscription. These signatures, with 3 exceptions only, ended with the name Vindex or the Avenger, which seems to have been adopted by the family after its migration to Rome as a kind of equivalent to the Greek Tisisthenes, which also means an avenger. Ultimately, as might be expected, this Latin cognomen of Vindex was transformed first into Da Vinci, and then into the plain, modern Vinci. It is very curious to observe how the idea of revenge, inspired by an Egyptian who lived before the time of Christ, is thus, as it were, embalmed in an English family name. A few of the Roman names inscribed upon the sherd I have actually since found mentioned in history and other records. They were, if I remember right, Indi, Liberia Pompeiana, Konifx, Macrini, Vindicis. This last being, of course, the name of a Roman lady. The following list, however, comprises all the Latin names upon the sherd. C. Caecilius Vindex. M. Aemilius Vindex. Sex. Verivs. Marvelvs. Q. Sosivs Priscus Senecio Vindex. L. Valorivs Commonivs Vindex. Sex. Otasilivs. L. Adivs. Vindex. Msivs Vindex. C. Fitivs. Vindex. Lisinivs Favstvs. Liberia Pompeiana Konivx Macrini Vindicis. Maniliel of Scylla Konivx Marvli Vindicis. After the Roman names there is evidently a gap of very many centuries. Nobody will ever know now what was the history of the relic during those dark ages, or how it came to have been preserved in the family. My poor friend Vinci had, it will be remembered, told me that his Roman ancestors finally settled in Lombardy, and when Charlemagne invaded it, returned with him across the Alps, and made their home in Brittany, whence they crossed to England in the reign of Edward the Confessor. How he knew this I am not aware, for there is no reference to Lombardy or Charlemagne upon the tile, though, as will presently be seen, there is a reference to Brittany. To continue, the next entries on the sherd, if I may except a long splash either of blood or red coloring matter of some sort, consist of 2 crosses drawn in red pigment, and probably representing crusaders' swords, and a rather neat monogram, DV, in scarlet and blue, perhaps executed by that same Dorothea Vinci who wrote, or rather painted, the doggerel couplet. To the left of this, inscribed in faint blue, were the initials AV, and after them a date 1800. Then came what was perhaps as curious an entry as anything upon this extraordinary relic of the past. It is executed in black letter, written over the crosses or crusaders' swords, and dated 1445. As the best plan will be to allow it to speak for itself, I here give the black letter FAC simile, together with the original Latin without the contractions, from which it will be seen that the writer was a fair medieval Latinist. Also we discovered what is still more curious, an English version of the black letter Latin. This, also written in black letter, we found inscribed on a second parchment that was in the coffer, apparently somewhat older in date than that on which was inscribed the medieval Latin translation of the uncial Greek of which I shall speak presently. This I also give in full. FAC simile of black letter inscription on the shirt of Ammonartes. Historic ias vald mystica et mirificu op SQD Myers Max Armorica SS Britannia Miras SEU Covihibiti et QDM SCS Cleric SS Eper Piri Mio in Manu Fairbat QDP itis Ilv Destruerit. Affirme SQDS et abipso Sathana Coflata Prestigiosa et Diabolica Arte Curie Peter Mevs Cofregit Ilvdi Dvaspites QSQDM Ego Jos Devisito Salvas Servavi et Adaptavi Sicit AP Parrot Di Louis Pierre Post Fest Beat Mrevir Giv Annie Gri MCCCCXLV. Expanded version of the above black letter inscription. Ista reliquia est vald mysticum et mirificum opus, quot majors meex armorica, silicet Britannia minor, secum conviabint. Et quidem sanctus clericus semper patri meo in manu ferbat quot penitus illa destruerit. Affirmans quot es et abipso sat hanna conflatum prestigiosa et diabolica arte, quer pater meus confregit illid in duas partes, quas cadem ego Johannes de Vincito salvas servavi et adaptavi sicit apparit di lune proximo post festum beat Marie Virginis any gradi MCCCCXLV. FAC simile of the Old English black letter translation of the above Latin inscription from the shirt of Ammonartes, found inscribed upon a parchment. These relic ys a right mystical work and a marvelous che mine on citaires aforetime dyd convey hider wy from armorike whys to seen Britain less and a certain holy clerk should always bear my fatter on hand he ought utterly for to fresh same affirmage yt was formed and conflated off Sathanas himself by arte magike and divelish wherefore my fatter dyd take same and to brass yt in twain, but first John de Vinci dyd save whole twa ptes thereof and to pieced to gitter again, so as ye on ys day Monday next following after feast of Saint Mary blessed Virgin in year of salvation 1405 and 40. Modernized version of the above black letter translation. These relic ys a right mystical work and a marvelous. Che mine on citaires aforetime dyd convey hider with them from armorike, which ys to seen Britain less and a certain holy clerk should always bear my fatter on hand that he ought utterly for to fresh same, affirmage that yt was formed and conflated of Sathanas himself by arte magike and divelish wherefore my fatter dyd take same, and to brass yt in twain, but I John de Vinci, dyd save whole twa parties thereof and to pieced them to gitter again so as ye on this day Monday next following, after ye feast of Saint Mary ye blessed Virgin in ye year of salvation 1405 and 40. The next and save one last entry was Elizabethan, and dated 1564. A most strange history, and one that did cost my father his life, for in seeking for the place upon the east coast of Africa, his pinnace was sunk by a Portuguese galleon off Lorenzo Marquez, and he himself perished, John Vinci. Then came the last entry, apparently, to judge by the style of writing, made by some representative of the family in the middle of the 18th century. It was a misquotation of the well-known lines in Hamlet, and ran thus: "There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio." 3. Another thing that makes me fix the date of this entry at the middle of the 18th century is that, curiously enough, I have an acting copy of Hamlet, written about 1740, in which these two lines are misquoted almost exactly in the same way, and I have little doubt but that the Vinci who wrote them on the potsherd heard them so misquoted at that date. Of course, the lines really run: "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. L.H.H." And now there remained but one more document to be examined, namely, the ancient black-letter transcription into medieval Latin of the uncial inscription on the sherd. As will be seen, this translation was executed and subscribed in the year 1495, by a certain learned man, Edmundus de Prato Edmund Pratt, by name, licentiate in canon law, of Exeter College, Oxford, who had actually been a pupil of Grocyn, the first scholar who taught Greek in England. For, no doubt, on the fame of this new learning reaching his ears, the Vinci of the day, perhaps that same John da Vinci who years before had saved the relic from destruction, and made the black-letter entry on the sherd in 1445, hurried off to Oxford to see if perchance it might avail to dissolve the secret of the mysterious inscription. Nor was he disappointed, for the learned Edmundus was equal to the task. Indeed, his rendering is so excellent an example of medieval learning and Latinity, that, even at the risk of sating the learned reader with too many antiquities, I have made up my mind to give it an facsimile, together with an expanded version for the benefit of those who find the contractions troublesome. The translation has several peculiarities on which this is not the place to dwell, but I would in passing call the attention of scholars to the passage, Duxerunt autumn nos ad reginam ad Venus laesana scorinentium, which strikes me as a delightful rendering of the original. Gamma alpha gamma omicron nu delta, beta alpha sigma lambda epsilon iota alpha nu tau nu xi nu omicron upsilon, chitar alpha iota sigma tau epsilon phi alpha nu omicron nu tau omega nu. For Grocyn, the instructor of Erasmus, studied Greek under Chalcondylas the Byzantine at Florence, and first lectured in the hall of Exeter College, Oxford, in 1491. Editor. Medieval black-letter Latin translation of the uncial inscription on the sherd of Amminardes. Amminardes egen reg. Egyptii uxer calicratus sacerdote isidis quade fovti demonia at duti filial, suatis astheni I maributa edamadat. Effugi quota ex Egypto regnati nectinibo siu pater tua. Pipter me amore pejorato. Fugites aut vsus nota transmer et exiage mesies PR litora libi vsus oriti erant ubi est petra cata mgna sculpta instar Ethiop capit. Dane dies theogibos flum memnii ecti pitim submersi summus pitim morbo mortuisum. In fine aut affair hoibs portabimer PR pallidi t veda. Ubi aviu emtitudo celu obi brat dies ex. Donec advenim ad cavu cata monti. Ubi olim mgna herbs erat. Cavern quac imiasi. Duxerutiaut nos ad regina advanaslasena scoritiu k magic yitbat et peritia omniu rare et salt pulchrit et vigor isesible erat. Hecem no patra tue amore p culsa pimu cuda ei connubiu mici mort parabat. Postia viara recusiti calicrata more. Me et timor regina fecto nos PR magica abduxit PR vias horribil, ubi est putius alpifudus. Cuius iuxta attitu iasbat senior philosophy cadaver. Et advietib emostravit flamme vita recta. Istar column voluditis. Voces emitti qsi tenitris. Tu CPR ignii pet nasuo expers trossit eti, ipsasisi formosir visa est. Quib fact uravit esse pater to quac immortalos sura esse. Esse me prius oxiza regine cotaburnia malit. Nec ieni ipsami oxidir valuit. Pipter nostrata imgica cuius ego met pitem habio. Alvero nichel huius gen maluit. Manib antiochal passis any mulier formositate et spicerit. Postia eu imgica picussit arte. At mortu efferbat ida siu fletib et vagetib, mi PR timor expulit ad ostiu emni flumen viliuli poro in naven quatii peperi. Wix postis hvc Athenas invecta su. At tu otazisthan, any qd cora madu nasi fac. Necess ienias moyer exquiriris I quavit mysteriu I petres et six dicer. Quatu in te est. Pater te calirat in regine mort. Sin timor sualit cafsa re relicas ifecta. Hoc ipsu oibi poster madu du bombs qs inveniator qui ignis law cru no pira resit et potentia dine duiabit hoiu. Talia dico incredibilia acuta at mini ncta de reb mici cognitus. Hec gris scripta latine redditit vir doctus idiom dies de prato. In decretus licentiatus e call exon. Oxon. Doctissimi grossini quandam e pupilis, id April. A. DNI. MCCCCLXXXXV degree. Expanded version of the above medieval Latin translation. Amminardes, Ingenieur Regio Egyptii, Uxor Calicratus, Sacerdotis Isidis, quam de fuvent demonia attendant. Filiolo suatis astheni jam moribunda ita mandat. Effugi quodam ex Egypto, regnanti nectinibo, cum pater tua, propter me amorem pejorato. Fugientes autumn versus notum trans mare, et vigenti quatuor menses per littora Libi versus orientem errantes, ubi est petra cadam magna sculpta in star Ethiopis capitis, dane dies quatuor ab osteo fluminis magni ejecti partem submersi summus partem morbo mortui summus. In fine autumn of ferris hominibus per tabimer per poluds et veda, ubi avium multitudo coelum abumbrat, dies decem, donec id venemus ad cavum quendam montem, ubi olim magna herbs erat, cavern quoquiaments, duxerunt autumn nos ad, reginam ad Venus laesanus coronentium, que magica udibator et peritia omnium rerum, et saltem pulchritudine et vigor insenescibilis erat. Hec magno patris tuae amore perculsa, primum cadem ei connubium mici mortem parabat. Postea vero, recusant calicrate, amore me et timor regina fecto. Nos per magicum abduxit per vias horribiles ubi est putius al profundis, cujus juxta additum jaspat signoris philosophi cadaver, et advenientibus monstravit flammum vita rectum, in star column voluntantis, voces emittentum quasi tenitris. Tunc per ignum impetu nocivo expers transia et jam ipsa sisi formosier visa est. Cabus factus juravit esse patrem tuum quoque immortalum ostenturum esse, esse me prius oxisa regine contubernium malit. Nec enim ipsa me oxidir valuit, propter nostratum magicum cujus ego met partem habeo. Alvero nichel hujus generis mailbat, manibus ante oculos passis, eni mulieris formositatem et spicerit. Postea illum magica percussit arte, et mortuum efferbat in cum fletibus et vegetibus, et me per timorem expulit ad ostium magni fluminis, volivuli, poro in nave, in quatii peperi, vix postis huc Athenas vectisum. Et tu, O Tisisthenes, any quid quorum mando nasi fac. Necess enim est mulierum exquiriris I qua vit mysterium impeters et vindicare. Quadam in te est, patrem tuum collieratum in regine mort. Sin timor su aliqua causa rem reliquis infectum, hoc ipsum omnibus posteris mando, dum bonus cas inveniatur ca ignis lavacrum non perheresit, et potentia dignus dominabitur hominum. Talia dico incredibilia cadem et minimi ficta de rebus mici cognitus. Hec gris scripta Latine reddit vir doctus Edmundus de Prato, indiscretus licentiatus, e collegio exoniensi oxoniensi doctissimi grossini quandam e pupilis, edibus aprilis anno domini mccclxxxxv degree. Well, I said, when at length I had read out and carefully examined these writings and paragraphs, at least those of them that were still easily legible. That is the conclusion of the whole matter, Leo, and now you can form your own opinion on it. I have already formed mine. And what is it? He asked in his quick way. It is this. I believe that potsherd to be perfectly genuine, and that, wonderful as it may seem, it has come down in your family from since the 4th century before Christ. The entries absolutely prove it, and therefore, however improbable it may seem, it must be accepted. But there I stop. That your remote ancestress, the Egyptian princess, or some scribe under her direction, wrote that which we see on the sherd I have no doubt, nor have I the slightest doubt but that her sufferings and the loss of her husband had turned her head, and that she was not right in her mind when she did write it. How do you account for what my father saw and heard there? Asked Leo. Coincidence. No doubt there are bluffs on the coast of Africa that look something like a man's head, and plenty of people who speak bastard Arabic. Also, I believe that there are lots of swamps. Another thing is, Leo, and I am sorry to say it, but I do not believe that your poor father was quite right when he wrote that letter. He had met with a great trouble, and also he had allowed this story to prey on his imagination, and he was a very imaginative man. Anyway, I believe that the whole thing is the most unmitigated rubbish. I know that there are curious things and forces in nature which we rarely meet with, and when we do meet them, cannot understand. But until I see it with my own eyes, which I am not likely to, I never will believe that there is any means of avoiding death, even for a time, or that there is or was a white sorceress living in the heart of an African swamp. It is bosh, my boy, all bosh. What do you say, Job? I say, sir, that it is a lie, and if it is true, I hope Mr. Leo won't meddle with no such things, for no good can't come of it. Perhaps you are both right, said Leo very quietly. I express no opinion. But I say this. I am going to set the matter at rest once and for all, and if you won't come with me I will go by myself. I looked at the young man, and saw that he meant what he said. When Leo means what he says he always puts on a curious look about the mouth. It has been a trick of his from a child. Now as a matter of fact, I had no intention of allowing Leo to go anywhere by himself for my own sake, if not for his. I was far too attached to him for that. I am not a man of many ties or affections. Circumstances have been against me in this respect, and men and women shrink from me. Or at least, I fancy that they do, which comes to the same thing, thinking, perhaps, that my somewhat forbidding exterior is a key to my character. Rather than endure this, I have, to a great extent, secluded myself from the world, and cut myself off from those opportunities which with most men result in the formation of relations more or less intimate. Therefore Leo was all the world to me, brother, child, and friend, and until he wearied of me, where he went there I should go too. But of course, it would not do to let him see how great a hold he had over me. So I cast about for some means whereby I might let myself down easy. Yes, I shall go, uncle, and if I don't find the rolling pillar of life, at any rate I shall get some first-class shooting. Here was my opportunity, and I took it. Shooting, I said. Ah, yes, I never thought of that. It must be a very wild stretch of country, and full of big game. I have always wanted to kill a buffalo before I die. Do you know, my boy, I don't believe in the quest, but I do believe in big game, and really on the whole, if after thinking it over, you make up your mind to go, I will take a holiday and come with you. Ah, said Leo. I thought that you would not lose such a chance. But how about money? We shall want a good lot. You need not trouble about that, I answered. There is all your income that has been accumulating for years, and besides that I have saved 2/3 of what your father left to me, as I consider, in trust for you. There is plenty of cash. Very well, then we may as well stow these things away and go up to town to see about our guns. By the way, Job, are you coming too? It's time you began to see the world. Well, sir, answered Job stolidly, I don't hold much with foreign parts, but if both you gentlemen are going you will want somebody to look after you, and I am not the man to stop behind after serving you for 20 years. That's right, Job, said I. You won't find out anything wonderful, but you will get some good shooting. And now look here, both of you. I won't have a word said to a living soul about this nonsense, and I pointed to the potsherd. If it got out and anything happened to me, my next of kin would dispute my will on the ground of insanity, and I should become the laughing-stock of Cambridge. That day 3 months we were on the ocean bound for Zanzibar. The squall. How different is the scene that I have now to tell from that which has just been told. Gone are the quiet college rooms, gone the wind-swayed English elms, the cawing rooks, and the familiar volumes on the shelves, and in their place there rises a vision of the great calm ocean gleaming in shaded silver lights beneath the beams of the full African moon. A gentle breeze fills the huge sail of our dhow, and draws us through the water that ripples musically against her sides. Most of the men are sleeping forward, for it is near midnight, but a stout swarthy Arab, Mahomed by name, stands at the tiller, lazily steering by the stars. 3 miles or more to our starboard is a low dim line. It is the eastern shore of Central Africa. We are running to the southward before the northeast monsoon, between the mainland and the reef that for hundreds of miles fringes this perilous coast. The night is quiet, so quiet that a whisper can be heard fore and aft the dhow, so quiet that a faint booming sound rolls across the water to us from the distant land. The Arab at the tiller holds up his hand, and says one word, Simba, lion. We all sit up and listen. Then it comes again, a slow, majestic sound, that thrills us to the marrow. Tomorrow by 10 o'clock, I say, we ought, if the captain is not out in his reckoning, which I think very probable, to make this mysterious rock with a man's head, and begin our shooting. And begin our search for the ruined city and the fire of life, corrected Leo, taking his pipe from his mouth, and laughing a little. Nonsense, I answered. You were airing your Arabic with that man at the tiller this afternoon. What did he tell you? He has been trading, slave trading, probably, up and down these latitudes for half of his iniquitous life, and once landed on this very man rock. Did he ever hear anything of the ruined city or the caves? No, answered Leo. He says that the country is all swamp behind, and full of snakes, especially pythons and game, and that no man lives there. But then there is a belt of swamp all along the East African coast, so that does not go for much. Yes, I said. It does, it goes for malaria. You see what sort of an opinion these gentry have of the country. Not one of them will go with us. They think that we are mad, and upon my word I believe that they are right. If ever we see old England again, I shall be astonished. However, it does not greatly matter to me at my age, but I am anxious for you, Leo, and for Job. It's a tomfool's business, my boy. All right, Uncle Horace. So far as I am concerned, I am willing to take my chance. Look, what is that cloud? And he pointed to a dark blotch upon the starry sky, some miles astern of us. Go and ask the man at the tiller, I said. He rose, stretched his arms, and went. Presently he returned. He says it is a squall, but it will pass far on one side of us. Just then Job came up, looking very stout and English in his shooting suit of brown flannel, and with a sort of perplexed appearance upon his honest round face that had been very common with him since he got into these strange waters. Please, sir, he said, touching his sun hat, which was stuck on to the back of his head in a somewhat ludicrous fashion. As we have got all those guns and things in the whaleboat astern, to say nothing of the provisions in the lockers, I think it would be best if I got down and slept in her. I don't like the looks, here he dropped his voice to a portentous whisper, of these black gentry. They have such a wonderful thievish way about them. Supposing now that some of them were to slip into the boat at night and cut the cable, and make off with her? That would be a pretty go, that would. The whaleboat, I may explain, was one specially built for us at Dundee in Scotland. We had brought it with us, as we knew that this coast was a network of creeks, and that we might require something to navigate them with. She was a beautiful boat, 30 feet in length, with a centerboard for sailing, copper bottom to keep the worm out of her, and full of watertight compartments. The captain of the dhow had told us that when we reached the rock, which he knew, and which appeared to be identical with the one described upon the sherd and by Leo's father, he would probably not be able to run up to it on account of the shallows and breakers. Therefore we had employed 3 hours that very morning, whilst we were totally becalmed, the wind having dropped at sunrise, in transferring most of our goods and chattels to the whaleboat, and placing the guns, ammunition, and preserved provisions in the watertight lockers specially prepared for them, so that when we did sight the fabled rock we should have nothing to do but step into the boat, and run her ashore. Another reason that induced us to take this precautionary step was that Arab captains are apt to run past the point that they are making, either from carelessness or owing to a mistake in its identity. Now, as sailors know, it is quite impossible for a dhow which is only rigged to run before the monsoon to beat back against it. Therefore we got our boat ready to row for the rock at any moment. Well, Job, I said, perhaps it would be as well. There are lots of blankets there, only be careful to keep out of the moon, or it may turn your head or blind you. Lord, sir, I don't think it would much matter if it did. It is that turned already with the sight of these blackamoors and their filthy, thieving ways. They are only fit for muck, they are. And they smell bad enough for it already. Job, it will be perceived, was no admirer of the manners and customs of our dark-skinned brothers. Accordingly we hauled up the boat by the tow-rope till it was right under the stern of the dhow, and Job bundled into her with all the grace of a falling sack of potatoes. Then we returned and sat down on the deck again, and smoked and talked in little gusts and jerks. The night was so lovely, and our brains were so full of suppressed excitement of one sort and another, that we did not feel inclined to turn in. For nearly an hour we sat thus, and then I think we both dozed off. At least I have a faint recollection of Leo sleepily explaining that the head was not a bad place to hit a buffalo, if you could catch him exactly between the horns, or send your bullet down his throat, or some nonsense of the sort. Then I remember no more, till suddenly, a frightful roar of wind, a shriek of terror from the awakening crew, and a whip-like sting of water in our faces. Some of the men ran to let go the halyards and lower the sail, but the parrel jammed and the yard would not come down. I sprang to my feet and hung on to a rope. The sky aft was dark as pitch, but the moon still shone brightly ahead of us and lit up the blackness. Beneath it sheen a huge white-topped breaker, 20 feet high or more, was rushing onto us. It was on the break. The moon shone on its crest and tipped its foam with light. On it rushed beneath the inky sky, driven by the awful squall behind it. Suddenly, in the twinkling of an eye, I saw the black shape of the whaleboat cast high into the air on the crest of the breaking wave. Then a shock of water, a wild rush of boiling foam, and I was clinging for my life to the shroud. I swept straight out from it like a flag in a gale. We were pooped. The wave passed. It seemed to me that I was under water for minutes. Really, it was seconds. I looked forward. The blast had torn out the great sail, and high in the air it was fluttering away to leeward like a huge wounded bird. Then for a moment there was comparative calm, and in it I heard Job's voice yelling wildly, "Come here to the boat." Bewildered and half-drowned as I was, I had the sense to rush aft. I felt the dhow sinking under me. She was full of water. Under her counter the whaleboat was tossing furiously, and I saw the Arab Mohammed, who had been steering, leap into her. I gave one desperate pull at the tow rope to bring the boat alongside. Wildly I sprang also. Job caught me by the arm, and I rolled into the bottom of the boat. Down went the dhow bodily, and as she did so Mohammed drew his curved knife and severed the fiber rope by which we were fast to her. And in another second we were driving before the storm over the place where the dhow had been. Great God! I shrieked. Where is Leo? Leo! Leo! He's gone, sir. God help him! Roared Job into my ear. And such was the fury of the squall that his voice sounded like a whisper. I wrung my hands in agony. Leo was drowned, and I was left alive to mourn him. Look out! Yelled Job. Here comes another. I turned. A second huge wave was overtaking us. I half hoped that it would drown me. With a curious fascination I watched its awful advent. The moon was nearly hidden now by the wreaths of the rushing storm, but a little light still caught the crest of the devouring breaker. There was something dark on it, a piece of wreckage. It was on us now, and the boat was nearly full of water. But she was built in airtight compartments. Heaven bless the man who invented them. And lifted up through it like a swan. Through the foam and turmoil, I saw the black thing on the wave hurrying right at me. I put out my right arm to ward it from me, and my hand closed on another arm, the wrist of which my fingers gripped like a vice. I am a very strong man, and had something to hold to, but my arm was nearly torn from its socket by the strain and weight of the floating body. Had the rush lasted another 2 seconds I might either have let go or gone with it. But it passed, leaving us up to our knees in water. Bail out! Bail out! Shouted Job, suiting the action to the word. But I could not bail just then, for as the moon went out and left us in total darkness, one faint, flying ray of light lit upon the face of the man I had gripped, who was now half lying, half floating in the bottom of the boat. It was Leo. Leo brought back by the wave, back, dead or alive, from the very jaws of death. Bail out! Bail out! Yelled Job, or we shall founder. I seized a large tin bowl with a handle to it, which was fixed under one of the seats, and the three of us bailed away for dear life. The furious tempest drove over and round us, flinging the boat this way and that. The wind and the storm wreaths and the sheets of stinging spray blinded and bewildered us, but through it all we worked like demons with the wild exhilaration of despair. For even despair can exhilarate. 1 minute. 3 minutes. 6 minutes. The boat began to lighten, and no fresh wave swamped us. 5 minutes more, and she was fairly clear. Then suddenly, above the awful shriekings of the hurricane came a duller, deeper roar. Great heavens! It was the voice of breakers. At that moment the moon began to shine forth again, this time behind the path of the squall. Out far across the torn bosom of the ocean shot the ragged arrows of her light, and there, half a mile ahead of us, was a white line of foam, then a little space of open-mouthed blackness, and then another line of white. It was the breakers, and their roar grew clearer, and yet more clear as we sped down upon them like a swallow. There they were, boiling up in snowy spouts of spray, smiting and gnashing together like the gleaming teeth of hell. Take the tiller, Mohammed! I roared in Arabic. We must try and shoot them. At the same moment I seized an oar, and got it out, motioning to Job to do likewise. Mohammed clambered aft, and got hold of the tiller, and with some difficulty Job, who had sometimes pulled a tub upon the homely cam, got out his oar. In another minute the boat's head was straight on to the ever-nearing foam. towards which she plunged and tore with the speed of a racehorse. Just in front of us, the first line of breakers seemed a little thinner than to the right or left. There was a cap of rather deeper water. I turned and pointed to it. "Steer for your life, Mahomed," I yelled. He was a skillful steersman, and well acquainted with the dangers of this most perilous coast, and I saw him grip the tiller, bend his heavy frame forward, and stare at the foaming terror till his big round eyes looked as though they would start out of his head. The send of the sea was driving the boat's head round to starboard. If we struck the line of breakers 50 yards to starboard of the gap, we must sink. It was a great field of twisting, spouting waves. Mahomed planted his foot against the seat before him, and glancing at him, I saw his brown toes spread out like a hand with the weight he put upon them as he took the strain of the tiller. She came round a bit, but not enough. I roared to Job to backwater, whilst I dragged and labored at my oar. She answered now, and none too soon. Heavens, we were in them. And then followed a couple of minutes of heartbreaking excitement such as I cannot hope to describe. All that I remember is a shrieking sea of foam, out of which the billows rose here, there, and everywhere like avenging ghosts from their ocean grave. Once we were turned right round, but either by chance, or through Mahomed's skillful steering, the boat's head came straight again before a breaker filled us. One more, a monster. We were through it or over it. More through than over. And then, with a wild yell of exultation from the Arab, we shot out into the comparative smooth water of the mouth of sea between the teeth-like lines of gnashing waves. But we were nearly full of water again, and not more than half a mile ahead was the second line of breakers. Again we set to and bailed furiously. Fortunately the storm had now quite gone by, and the moon shone brightly, revealing a rocky headland running half a mile or more out into the sea, of which this second line of breakers appeared to be a continuation. At any rate, they boiled around its foot. Probably the ridge that formed the headland ran out into the ocean, only at a lower level, and made the reef also. This headland was terminated by a curious peak that seemed not to be more than a mile away from us. Just as we got the boat pretty clear for the second time, Leo, to my immense relief, opened his eyes and remarked that the clothes had tumbled off the bed, and that he supposed it was time to get up for chapel. I told him to shut his eyes and keep quiet, which he did without in the slightest degree realizing the position. As for myself, his reference to chapel made me reflect, with a sort of sick longing, on my comfortable rooms at Cambridge. Why had I been such a fool as to leave them? This is a reflection that has several times recurred to me since, and with an ever-increasing force. But now again we were drifting down on the breakers, though with lessened speed, for the wind had fallen, and only the current or the tide, it afterwards turned out to be the tide, was driving us. Another minute, and with a sort of howl to Allah from the Arab, a pious ejaculation from myself, and something that was not pious from Job, we were in them. And then the whole scene, down to our final escape, repeated itself, only not quite so violently. Mahomed's skillful steering and the airtight compartments saved our lives. In 5 minutes we were through, and drifting, for we were too exhausted to do anything to help ourselves except keep her head straight, with the most startling rapidity round the headland which I have described. Round we went with the tide, until we got well under the lee of the point, and then suddenly the speed slackened, we ceased to make way, and finally appeared to be in dead water. The storm had entirely passed, leaving a clean-washed sky behind it. The headland intercepted the heavy sea that had been occasioned by the squall, and the tide, which had been running so fiercely up the river, for we were now in the mouth of a river, was sluggish before it turned, so we floated quietly, and before the moon went down managed to bail out the boat thoroughly and get her a little ship-shape. Leo was sleeping profoundly, and on the whole I thought it wise not to wake him. It was true he was sleeping in wet clothes, but the night was now so warm that I thought, and so did Job, that they were not likely to injure a man of his unusually vigorous constitution. Besides, we had no dry ones at hand. Presently the moon went down, and left us floating on the waters, now only heaving like some troubled woman's breast, with leisure to reflect upon all that we had gone through and all that we had escaped. Job stationed himself at the bow. Mahomed kept his post at the tiller, and I sat on a seat in the middle of the boat close to where Leo was lying. The moon went slowly down in chastened loveliness. She departed like some sweet bride into her chamber, and long veil-like shadows crept up the sky through which the stars peeped shyly out. Soon, however, They too began to pale before a splendor in the east, and then the quivering footsteps of the dawn came rushing across the newborn blue, and shook the high stars from their places. Quieter and yet more quiet grew the sea, quiet as the soft mist that brooded on her bosom, and covered up her troubling, as the elusive wreaths of sleep brood upon a pain-racked mind, causing it to forget its sorrow. From the east to the west sped the angels of the dawn, from sea to sea, from mountaintop to mountaintop, scattering light with both their hands. On they sped out of the darkness, perfect, glorious, like spirits of the just breaking from the tomb. On over the quiet sea, over the low coastline, and the swamps beyond, and the mountains above them. Over those who slept in peace and those who woke in sorrow, over the evil and the good, over the living and the dead, over the wide world and all that breathes or has breath thereon. It was a wonderfully beautiful sight, and yet sad perhaps from the very excess of its beauty. The arising sun, the setting sun. There we have the symbol and the type of humanity, and all things with which humanity has to do. The symbol and the type, yes, and the earthly beginning, and the end also. And on that morning this came home to me with a peculiar force. The sun that rose today for us had set last night for 18 of our fellow voyagers. Had set everlastingly for 18 whom we knew. The Tao had gone down with them. They were tossing about among the rocks and seaweed. So much human drift on the great ocean of death. And we four were saved. But one day a sunrise will come when we shall be among those who are lost. And then others will watch those glorious rays, and grow sad in the midst of beauty, and dream of death in the full glow of a rising life. For this is the lot of man. V. The head of the Ethiopian. At length the heralds and forerunners of the royal sun had done their work, and searching out the shadows, had caused them to flee away. Then up he came in glory from his ocean bed, and flooded the earth with warmth and light. I sat there in the boat listening to the gentle lapping of the water and watched him rise, till presently the slight drift of the boat brought the odd-shaped rock, or peak, at the end of the promontory which we had weathered with so much peril, between me and the majestic sight, and blotted it from my view. I still continued, however, to stare at the rock absently enough, till presently it became edged with the fire of the growing light behind it, and then I started, as well I might, for I perceived that the top of the peak, which was about 80 feet high by 150 feet thick at its base, was shaped like a Negro's head and face, whereon was stamped a most fiendish and terrifying expression. There was no doubt about it. There were the thick lips, the fat cheeks, and the squat nose standing out with startling clearness against the flaming background. There, too, was the round skull, washed into shape perhaps by thousands of years of wind and weather. And to complete the resemblance, there was a scrubby growth of weeds or lichen upon it, which against the sun looked for all the world like the wool on a colossal Negro's head. It certainly was very odd. So odd that now I believe it is not a mere freak of nature but a gigantic monument fashioned, like the well-known Egyptian Sphinx, by a forgotten people out of a pile of rock that lent itself to their design, perhaps as an emblem of warning and defiance to any enemies who approached the harbor. Unfortunately, we were never able to ascertain whether or not this was the case, inasmuch as the rock was difficult of access both from the land and the waterside, and we had other things to attend to. Myself, considering the matter by the light of what we afterwards saw, I believe that it was fashioned by man, but whether or not this is so, there it stands, and sullenly stares from age to age out across the changing sea. There it stood 2,000 years and more ago, when Amenartes, the Egyptian princess, and the wife of Leo's remote ancestor Callicrates, gazed upon its devilish face, and there I have no doubt it will still stand when as many centuries as are numbered between her day and our own are added to the year that bore us to oblivion. What do you think of that, Job? I asked of our retainer, who was sitting on the edge of the boat, trying to get as much sunshine as possible, and generally looking uncommonly wretched, and I pointed to the fiery and demoniacal head. "O Lord, sir," answered Job, who now perceived the object for the first time, "I think that the old gentleman must have been sitting for his portrait on them rocks." I laughed, and the laugh woke up Leo. "Hello," he said. "What's the matter with me? I am all stiff. Where is the Tao? Give me some brandy, please." "You may be thankful that you are not stiffer, my boy," I answered. "The Tao is sunk, everybody on board her is drowned with the exception of us four, and your own life was only saved by a miracle." And whilst Job, Now that it was light enough, searched about in a locker for the brandy for which Leo asked. I told him the history of our night's adventure. Great heavens, he said faintly. And to think that we should have been chosen to live through it. By this time the brandy was forthcoming, and we all had a good pull at it, and thankful enough we were for it. Also the sun was beginning to get strength, and warm our chilled bones, for we had been wet through for 5 hours or more. Why, said Leo, with a gasp as he put down the brandy bottle. There is the head the writing talks of, the rock carven like the head of an Ethiopian. Yes, I said, there it is. Well then, he answered, the whole thing is true. I don't see at all that follows, I answered. We knew this head was here. Your father saw it. Very likely it is not the same head that the writing talks of. Or if it is, it proves nothing. Leo smiled at me in a superior way. You are an unbelieving Jew, Uncle Horace, he said. Those who live will see. Exactly so, I answered. And now perhaps you will observe that we are drifting across a sandbank into the mouth of the river. Get hold of your oar, Job, and we will row in and see if we can find a place to land. The river mouth which we were entering did not appear to be a very wide one, though as yet the long banks of steaming mist that clung about its shores had not lifted sufficiently to enable us to see its exact measure. There was, as is the case with nearly every East African river, a considerable bar at the mouth, which no doubt, when the wind was on shore and the tide running out, was absolutely impassable even for a boat drawing only a few inches. But as things were it was manageable enough, and we did not ship a cupful of water. In 20 minutes we were well across it, with but slight assistance from ourselves, and being carried by a strong though somewhat variable breeze well up the harbor. By this time the mist was being sucked up by the sun, which was getting uncomfortably hot, and we saw that the mouth of the little estuary was here about half a mile across, and that the banks were very marshy, and crowded with crocodiles lying about on the mud like logs. About a mile ahead of us, however, was what appeared to be a strip of firm land, and for this we steered. In another quarter of an hour we were there, and making the boat fast to a beautiful tree with broad shining leaves, and flowers of the magnolia species, only they were rose-colored and not white. One, which hung over the water, we disembarked. This done we undressed, washed ourselves and spread our clothes, together with the contents of the boat, in the sun to dry, which they very quickly did. Then, taking shelter from the sun under some trees, we made a hearty breakfast off a paysandu potted tongue, of which we had brought a good quantity with us, congratulating ourselves loudly on our good fortune in having loaded and provisioned the boat on the previous day before the hurricane destroyed the dhow. By the time that we had finished our meal our clothes were quite dry, and we hastened to get into them, feeling not a little refreshed. Indeed, with the exception of weariness and a few bruises, none of us were the worse for the terrifying adventure which had been fatal to all our companions. Leo, it is true, had been half drowned, but that is no great matter to a vigorous young athlete of 25. 1. There is a known species of magnolia with pink flowers. It is indigenous in Sikkim, and known as Magnolia campbellii. Editor. After breakfast we started to look about us. We were on a strip of dry land about 200 yards broad by 500 long, bordered on one side by the river, and on the other 3 by endless desolate swamps, that stretched as far as the eye could reach. This strip of land was raised about 25 feet above the plane of the surrounding swamps and the river level. Indeed, it had every appearance of having been made by the hand of man. This place has been a wharf, said Leo dogmatically. Nonsense, I answered. Who would be stupid enough to build a wharf in the middle of these dreadful marshes in a country inhabited by savages? That is, if it is inhabited at all. Perhaps it was not always marsh, and perhaps the people were not always savage, he said drily, looking down the steep bank, for we were standing by the river. Look there, he went on, pointing to a spot where the hurricane of the previous night had torn up one of the magnolia trees by the roots, which had grown on the extreme edge of the bank just where it sloped down to the water, and lifted a large cake of earth with them. Is not that stonework? If not, it is very like it. Nonsense, I said again, but we clambered down to the spot, and got between the upturned roots and the bank. Well, he said. But I did not answer this time. I only whistled. For there, laid bare by the removal of the earth, was an undoubted facing of solid stone laid in large blocks and bound together with brown cement. so hard that I could make no impression on it with the file and my shooting knife. Nor was this all. Seeing something projecting through the soil at the bottom of the bared patch of walling, I removed the loose earth with my hands, and revealed a huge stone ring, a foot or more in diameter, and about 3 inches thick. This fairly staggered me. Looks rather like a wharf where good-sized vessels have been moored, does it not, Uncle Horace? Said Leo, with an excited grin. I tried to say nonsense again, but the word stuck in my throat. The ring spoke for itself. In some past age vessels had been moored there, and this stone wall was undoubtedly the remnant of a solidly constructed wharf. Probably the city to which it had belonged lay buried beneath the swamp behind it. Begins to look as though there were something in the story after all, Uncle Horace, said the exultant Leo. And reflecting on the mysterious Negro's head and the equally mysterious stonework, I made no direct reply. A country like Africa, I said, is sure to be full of the relics of long dead and forgotten civilizations. Nobody knows the age of the Egyptian civilization, and very likely it had offshoots. Then there were the Babylonians and the Phoenicians and the Persians, and all manner of people, all more or less civilized, to say nothing of the Jews whom everybody wants nowadays. It is possible that they, or any one of them, may have had colonies or trading stations about here. Remember those buried Persian cities that the consul showed us at Kilwa? 2 near Kilwa, on the east coast of Africa, about 400 miles south of Zanzibar, is a cliff which has been recently washed by the waves. On the top of this cliff are Persian tombs known to be at least 7 centuries old by the dates still legible upon them. Beneath these tombs is a layer of debris representing a city. Farther down the cliff is a second layer representing an older city, and farther down still a third layer, the remains of yet another city of vast and unknown antiquity. Beneath the bottom city were recently found some specimens of glazed earthenware, such as are occasionally to be met with on that coast to this day. I believe that they are now in the possession of Sir John Kirk. Editor. Quite so, said Leo, but that is not what you said before. Well, what is to be done now? I asked, turning the conversation. As no answer was forthcoming, we walked to the edge of the swamp, and looked over it. It was apparently boundless, and vast flocks of every sort of waterfowl flew from its recesses, till it was sometimes difficult to see the sky. Now that the sun was getting high, it drew thin, sickly-looking clouds of poisonous vapor from the surface of the marsh, and from the scummy pools of stagnant water. 2 things are clear to me, I said, addressing my 3 companions, who stared at this spectacle in dismay. First, that we can't go across there. I pointed to the swamp. And secondly, that if we stop here we shall certainly die of fever. That's as clear as a haystack, sir, said Job. Very well then, there are 2 alternatives before us. One is to bout ship, and try and run for some port in the whaleboat, which would be a sufficiently risky proceeding, and the other to sail or row on up the river, and see where we come to. I don't know what you are going to do, said Leo, setting his mouth, but I am going up that river. Job turned up the whites of his eyes and groaned, and the Arab murmured Allah, and groaned also. As for me, I remarked sweetly that as we seemed to be between the devil and the deep sea, it did not much matter where we went. But in reality I was as anxious to proceed as Leo. The colossal Negro's head and the stone wharf had excited my curiosity to an extent of which I was secretly ashamed, and I was prepared to gratify it at any cost. Accordingly, having carefully fitted the mast, restowed the boat, and got out our rifles, we embarked. Fortunately the wind was blowing on shore from the ocean, so we were able to hoist the sail. Indeed, we afterwards found out that as a general rule the wind set on shore from daybreak for some hours, and offshore again at sunset, and the explanation that I offer of this is, that when the earth is cooled by the dew and the night the hot air rises, and the draught rushes in from the sea till the sun has once more heated it through. At least that appeared to be the rule here. Taking advantage of this favoring wind, we sailed merrily up the river for 3 or 4 hours. Once we came across a school of hippopotami, which rose and bellowed dreadfully at us within 10 or a dozen fathoms of the boat, much to Job's alarm, and I will confess, to my own. These were the first hippopotami that we had ever seen, and to judge by their insatiable curiosity, I should judge that we were the first white men that they had ever seen. Upon my word, I once or twice thought that they were coming into the boat to gratify it. Leo wanted to fire at them, but I dissuaded him, fearing the consequences. Also, we saw hundreds of crocodiles basking on the muddy banks, and thousands upon thousands of waterfowl. Some of these we shot, and among them was a wild goose which, in addition to the sharp curved spurs on its wings, had a spur about 3/4 of an inch long growing from the skull just between the eyes. We never shot another like it, so I do not know if it was a sport, or a distinct species. In the latter case this incident may interest naturalists. Job named it the unicorn goose. About midday the sun grew intensely hot, and the stench drawn up by it from the marshes which the river drains was something too awful, and caused us instantly to swallow precautionary doses of quinine. Shortly afterwards the breeze died away altogether, and as rowing our heavy boat against stream in the heat was out of the question, we were thankful enough to get under the shade of a group of trees, a species of willow, that grew by the edge of the river, and lie there and gasp till at length the approach of sunset put a period to our miseries. Seeing what appeared to be an open space of water straight ahead of us, we determined to row there before settling what to do for the night. Just as we were about to loosen the boat, however, a beautiful waterbuck, with great horns curving forward, and a white stripe across the rump, came down to the river to drink, without perceiving us hidden away within 50 yards under the willows. Leo was the first to catch sight of it, and being an ardent sportsman, thirsting for the blood of big game, about which he had been dreaming for months, he instantly stiffened all over, and pointed like a setter dog. Seeing what was the matter, I handed him his express rifle, at the same time taking my own. "Now then," I whispered, "mind you don't miss." "Miss?" he whispered back contemptuously. "I could not miss it if I tried." He lifted the rifle, and the roan-colored buck, having drunk his fill, raised his head and looked out across the river. He was standing right against the sunset sky on a little eminence, or ridge of ground, which ran across the swamp, evidently a favorite path for game, and there was something very beautiful about him. Indeed, I do not think that if I live to 100 I shall ever forget that desolate and yet most fascinating scene. It is stamped upon my memory. To the right and left were wide stretches of lonely death-breeding swamp, unbroken and unrelieved so far as the eye could reach, except here and there by ponds of black and peaty water that, mirror-like, flashed up the red rays of the setting sun. Behind us and before stretched the vista of the sluggish river, ending in glimpses of a reed-fringed lagoon, on the surface of which the long lights of the evening played as the faint breeze stirred the shadows. To the west loomed the huge red ball of the sinking sun, now vanishing down the vapory horizon, and filling the great heaven, high across whose arch the cranes and wildfowl streamed in line, square, and triangle, with flashes of flying gold and the lurid stain of blood. And then ourselves, 3 modern Englishmen in a modern English boat, seeming to jar upon and look out of tone with that measureless desolation. And in front of us the noble buck limbed out upon a background of ruddy sky. Bang! Away he goes with a mighty bound. Leo has missed him. Bang! Right under him again. Now for a shot. I must have one, though he is going like an arrow, and 100 yards away and more. By Jove! Over and over and over. Well, I think I've wiped your eye there, Master Leo. I say, struggling against the ungenerous exultation that in such a supreme moment of one's existence will rise in the best-mannered sportsman's breast. Confound you, yes, growled Leo, and then, with that quick smile that is one of his charms lighting up his handsome face like a ray of light, I beg your pardon, old fellow. I congratulate you. It was a lovely shot, and mine were vile. We got out of the boat and ran to the buck, which was shot through the spine and stone dead. It took us a quarter of an hour or more to clean it and cut off as much of the best meat as we could carry, and having packed this away, we had barely light enough to row up into the lagoon-like space, into which, there being a hollow in the swamp, the river here expanded. Just as the light vanished we cast anchor about 30 fathoms from the edge of the lake. We did not dare to go ashore, not knowing if we should find dry ground to camp on, and greatly fearing the poisonous exhalations from the marsh, from which we thought we should be freer on the water. So we lighted a lantern, and made our evening meal off another potted tongue in the best fashion that we could, and then prepared to go to sleep, only, however, to find that sleep was impossible. For whether they were attracted by the lantern, or by the unaccustomed smell of a white man for which they had been waiting for the last 1,000 years or so, I know not. But certainly we were presently attacked by tens of thousands of the most bloodthirsty, pertinacious, and huge mosquitoes that I ever saw or read of. In clouds they came, and pinged and buzzed and bit till we were nearly mad. Tobacco smoke only seemed to stir them into a merrier and more active life, till at length we were driven to covering ourselves with blankets, head and all, and sitting to slowly stew and continually scratch and swear beneath them. And as we sat, suddenly rolling out like thunder through the silence came the deep roar of a lion, and then of a second lion, moving among the reeds within 60 yards of us. "I say," said Leo, sticking his head out from under his blanket, "lucky we ain't on the bank, avuncular?" Leo sometimes addressed me in this disrespectful way. "Curse it! A mosquito has bitten me on the nose." And the head vanished again. Shortly after this the moon came up, and notwithstanding every variety of roar that echoed over the water to us from the lions on the banks, we began, thinking ourselves perfectly secure, to gradually doze off. I do not quite know what it was that made me poke my head out of the friendly shelter of the blanket, perhaps because I found that the mosquitoes were biting right through it. Anyhow, as I did so I heard Job whisper, in a frightened voice, "Oh, my stars, look there." Instantly we all of us looked, and this was what we saw in the moonlight. Near the shore were two wide and ever-widening circles of concentric rings rippling away across the surface of the water, and in the heart and center of the circles were two dark moving objects. "What is it?" asked I. "It is those damned lions, sir," answered Job, in a tone which was an odd mixture of a sense of personal injury, habitual respect, and acknowledged fear. "And they are swimming here to heat us," he added, nervously picking up an H in his agitation. I looked again. There was no doubt about it. I could catch the glare of their ferocious eyes. Attracted either by the smell of the newly killed waterbuck meat or of ourselves, the hungry beasts were actually storming our position. Leo already had his rifle in his hand. I called to him to wait till they were nearer, and meanwhile grabbed my own. Some 15 feet from us the water shallowed on a bank to the depth of about 15 inches, and presently the first of them, it was the lioness, got onto it, shook herself and roared. At that moment Leo fired. The bullet went right down her open mouth and out at the back of her neck, and down she dropped, with a splash, dead. The other lion, a full-grown male, was some 2 paces behind her. At this second he got his forepaws onto the bank, when a strange thing happened. There was a rush and disturbance of the water, such as one sees in a pond in England when a pike takes a little fish, only 1,000 times fiercer and larger, and suddenly the lion gave a most terrific snarling roar and sprang forward onto the bank, dragging something black with him. "Allah!" shouted Mahomed, "a crocodile has got him by the leg." And sure enough he had. We could see the long snout with its gleaming lines of teeth and the reptile body behind it. And then followed an extraordinary scene indeed. The lion managed to get well onto the bank, the crocodile half standing and half swimming, still nipping his hind leg. He roared till the air quivered with the sound, and then with a savage shrieking snarl, turned round and clawed hold of the crocodile's head. The crocodile shifted his grip, having, as we afterwards discovered, had one of his eyes torn out, and slightly turned over. Instantly the lion got him by the throat and held on, and then over and over they rolled upon the bank struggling hideously. It was impossible to follow their movements, but when next we got a clear view the tables had turned, for the crocodile, whose head seemed to be a mass of gore, had got the lion's body in his iron jaws just above the hips, and was squeezing him and shaking him to and fro. For his part, the tortured brute, roaring in agony, was clawing and biting madly at his enemy's scaly head, and fixing his great hind claws in the crocodile's, comparatively speaking, soft throat, ripping it open as one would rip a glove. Then all of a sudden the end came. The lion's head fell forward on the crocodile's back, and with an awful groan he died, and the crocodile, after standing for a minute motionless, slowly rolled over onto his side, his jaws still fixed across the carcass of the lion, which we afterwards found he had bitten almost in halves. This duel to the death was a wonderful and a shocking sight, and one that I suppose few men have seen, and thus it ended. When it was all over, leaving Mahome to keep a lookout, we managed to spend the rest of the night as quietly as the mosquitoes would allow. 6. An early Christian ceremony. Next morning, at the earliest light of dawn, we rose, performed such ablutions as circumstances would allow, and generally made ready to start. I am bound to say that when there was sufficient light to enable us to see each other's faces, I, for one, burst out into a roar of laughter. Job's fat and comfortable countenance was swollen out to nearly twice its natural size from mosquito bites, and Leo's condition was not much better. Indeed, of the three I had come off much the best, probably owing to the toughness of my dark skin, and to the fact that a good deal of it was covered by hair, for since we had started from England I had allowed my naturally luxuriant beard to grow at its own sweet will. But the other two were, comparatively speaking, clean-shaved, which of course gave the enemy a larger extent of open country to operate on. Though in Mahome's case the mosquitoes, recognizing the taste of a true believer, would not touch him at any price. How often, I wonder, during the next week or so did we wish that we were flavored like an Arab? By the time that we had done laughing as heartily as our swollen lips would allow, it was daylight, and the morning breeze was coming up from the sea, cutting lanes through the dense marsh mists, and here and there rolling them before it in great balls of fleecy vapor. So we set our sail, and having first taken a look at the 2 dead lions and the alligator, which we were of course unable to skin, being destitute of means of curing the pelts, we started, and sailing through the lagoon, followed the course of the river on the farther side. At midday, when the breeze dropped, we were fortunate enough to find a convenient piece of dry land on which to camp and light a fire, and here we cooked 2 wild ducks and some of the waterbuck's flesh, not in a very appetizing way, it is true, but still sufficiently. The rest of the buck's flesh we cut into strips and hung in the sun to dry into biltong, as I believe, the South African Dutch call flesh thus prepared. On this welcome patch of dry land we stopped till the following dawn, and as before, spent the night in warfare with the mosquitoes, but without other troubles. The next day or 2 passed in similar fashion, and without noticeable adventures, except that we shot a specimen of a peculiarly graceful hornless buck, and saw many varieties of water lily in full bloom, some of them blue and of exquisite beauty, though few of the flowers were perfect, owing to the prevalence of a white water maggot with a green head that fed upon them. It was on the 5th day of our journey, when we had traveled, so far as we could reckon, about 135 to 140 miles westwards from the coast, that the first event of any real importance occurred. On that morning the usual wind failed us about 11 o'clock, and after pulling a little way we were forced to halt, more or less exhausted, at what appeared to be the junction of our stream with another of a uniform width of about 50 feet. Some trees grew near at hand. The only trees in all this country were along the banks of the river, and under these we rested, and then, the land being fairly dry just here, walked a little way along the edge of the river to prospect, and shoot a few waterfowl for food. Before we had gone 50 yards we perceived that all hopes of getting further up the stream in the whaleboat were at an end, for not 200 yards above where we had stopped were a succession of shallows and mudbanks, with not 6 inches of water over them. It was a watery cul-de-sac. Turning back, we walked some way along the banks of the other river, and soon came to the conclusion, from various indications, that it was not a river at all, but an ancient canal, like the one which is to be seen above Mombasa, on the Zanzibar coast, connecting the Tana River with the Aussie, in such a way as to enable the shipping coming down the Tana to cross to the Aussie, and reach the sea by it, and thus avoid the very dangerous bar that blocks the mouth of the Tana. The canal before us had evidently been dug out by man at some remote period of the world's history, and the results of his digging still remained in the shape of the raised banks that had no doubt once formed towing paths. Except here and there, where they had been hollowed out by the water or fallen in, these banks of stiff binding clay were at a uniform distance from each other, and the depth of the stream also appeared to be uniform. Current there was little or none, and as a consequence, the surface of the canal was choked with vegetable growth, intersected by little paths of clear water, made I suppose by the constant passage of waterfowl, iguanas, and other vermin. Now, as it was evident that we could not proceed up the river, it became equally evident that we must either try the canal, or else return to the sea. We could not stop where we were, to be baked by the sun and eaten up by the mosquitoes, till we died of fever in that dreary marsh. Well, I suppose that we must try it, I said, and the others assented in their various ways. Leo, as though it were the best joke in the world, Job in respectful disgust, and Mahomed, with an invocation to the Prophet, and a comprehensive curse upon all unbelievers and their ways of thought and travel. Accordingly, As soon as the sun got low, having little or nothing more to hope for from our friendly wind, we started. For the first hour or so we managed to row the boat, though with great labor, but after that the weeds got too thick to allow of it, and we were obliged to resort to the primitive and most exhausting resource of towing her. For 2 hours we labored, Mahomed, Job, and I, who was supposed to be strong enough to pull against the two of them, on the bank, while Leo sat in the bow of the boat, and brushed away the weeds which collected round the cutwater with Mahomed's sword. At dark we halted for some hours to rest and enjoy the mosquitoes, but about midnight we went on again, taking advantage of the comparative cool of the night. At dawn we rested for 3 hours, and then started once more, and labored on till about 10 o'clock, when a thunderstorm, accompanied by a deluge of rain, overtook us, and we spent the next 6 hours practically under water. I do not know that there is any necessity for me to describe the next 4 days of our voyage in detail, further than to say that they were, on the whole, the most miserable that I ever spent in my life, forming one monotonous record of heavy labor, heat, misery, and mosquitoes. All that dreary way we passed through a region of almost endless swamp, and I can only attribute our escape from fever and death to the constant doses of quinine and purgatives which we took, and the unceasing toil which we were forced to undergo. On the 3rd day of our journey up the canal we had sighted a round hill that loomed dimly through the vapors of the marsh, and on the evening of the 4th night, when we camped, this hill seemed to be within 25 or 30 miles of us. We were by now utterly exhausted, and felt as though our blistered hands could not pull the boat a yard farther, and that the best thing that we could do would be to lie down and die in that dreadful wilderness of swamp. It was an awful position, and one in which I trust no other white man will ever be placed, and as I threw myself down in the boat to sleep the sleep of utter exhaustion, I bitterly cursed my folly in ever having been a party to such a mad undertaking, which could, I saw, only end in our death in this ghastly land. I thought, I remember, as I slowly sank into a doze, of what the appearance of the boat and her unhappy crew would be in 2 or 3 months' time from that night. There she would lie, with gaping seams and half filled with foetid water, which, when the mist-laden wind stirred her, would wash backwards and forwards through our mouldering bones, and that would be the end of her, and of those in her who would follow after myths and seek out the secrets of nature. Already I seemed to hear the water rippling against the desiccated bones and rattling them together, rolling my skull against Mahome's, and his against mine, till at last Mahomes stood straight up upon its vertebrae, and glared at me through its empty eye holes, and cursed me with its grinning jaws, because I, a dog of a Christian, disturbed the last sleep of a true believer. I opened my eyes and shuddered at the horrid dream, and then shuddered again at something that was not a dream, for 2 great eyes were gleaming down at me through the misty darkness. I struggled up, and in my terror and confusion shrieked, and shrieked again, so that the others sprang up too, reeling, and drunken with sleep and fear. And then all of a sudden there was a flash of cold steel, and a great spear was held against my throat, and behind it other spears gleamed cruelly. "Peace," said a voice, speaking in Arabic, or rather in some dialect into which Arabic entered very largely. "Who are ye who come hither swimming on the water? Speak or ye die." And the steel pressed sharply against my throat, sending a cold chill through me. "We are travelers, and have come hither by chance," I answered in my best Arabic, which appeared to be understood, for the man turned his head, and addressing a tall form that towered up in the background, said, "Father, shall we slay?" "What is the color of the men?" said a deep voice in answer. "White is their color." "Slay not," was the reply. 4 sons since was the word brought to me from she who must be obeyed. "White men come. If white men come, slay them not. Let them be brought to the house of she who must be obeyed. Bring forth the men, and let that which they have with them be brought forth also." "Come," said the man, half leading and half dragging me from the boat, and as he did so I perceived other men doing the same kind office to my companions. On the bank were gathered a company of some 50 men. In that light all I could make out was that they were armed with huge spears, were very tall, and strongly built, comparatively light in color, and nude, save for a leopard skin tied round the middle. Presently Leo and Job were bundled out and placed beside me. "What on earth is up?" said Leo, rubbing his eyes. "Oh Lord! Sir, here's a rum go," ejaculated Job. And just at that moment a disturbance ensued, and Mahomed came tumbling between us, followed by a shadowy form with an uplifted spear. Allah! Allah! howled Mahomed, feeling that he had little to hope from man. Protect me! Protect me! Father, it is a black one, said a voice. What said she who must be obeyed about the black one? She said naught, but slay him not. Come hither, my son. The man advanced, and the tall shadowy form bent forward and whispered something. Yes, yes, said the other, and chuckled in a rather blood-curdling tone. Are the 3 white men there? Asked the form. Yes, they are there. Then bring up that which is made ready for them, and let the men take all that can be brought from the thing which floats. Hardly had he spoken when men came running up, carrying on their shoulders neither more nor less than palanquins, for bearers and 2 spare men to a palanquin. And in these it was promptly indicated we were expected to stow ourselves. Well, said Leo, it is a blessing to find anybody to carry us after having to carry ourselves so long. Leo always takes a cheerful view of things, there being no help for it. After seeing the others into theirs, I tumbled into my own litter, and very comfortable I found it. It appeared to be manufactured of cloth woven from grass fiber, which stretched and yielded to every motion of the body, and being bound top and bottom to the bearing pole, gave a grateful support to the head and neck. Scarcely had I settled myself when, accompanying their steps with a monotonous song, the bearers started at a swinging trot. For half an hour or so I lay still, reflecting on the very remarkable experiences that we were going through, and wondering if any of my eminently respectable fossil friends down at Cambridge would believe me if I were to be miraculously set at the familiar dinner table for the purpose of relating them. I do not want to convey any disrespectful notion or slight when I call those good and learned men fossils, but my experience is that people are apt to fossilize even at a university if they follow the same paths too persistently. I was getting fossilized myself, but of late my stock of ideas has been very much enlarged. Well, I lay and reflected, and wondered what on earth would be the end of it all, till at last I ceased to wonder, and went to sleep. I suppose I must have slept for 7 or 8 hours, getting the first real rest that I had had since the night before the loss of the Tao, for when I woke the sun was high in the heavens. We were still journeying on at a pace of about 4 miles an hour, peeping out through the mist-like curtains of the litter, which were ingeniously fixed to the bearing pole. I perceived to my infinite relief that we had passed out of the region of eternal swamp, and were now traveling over swelling grassy plains towards a cup-shaped hill. Whether or not it was the same hill that we had seen from the canal I do not know, and have never since been able to discover, for as we afterwards found out, these people will give little information upon such points. Next I glanced at the men who were bearing me. They were of a magnificent build, few of them being under 6 feet in height, and yellowish in color. Generally their appearance had a good deal in common with that of the East African Somali, only their hair was not frizzed up, but hung in thick black locks upon their shoulders. Their features were aquiline, and in many cases exceedingly handsome, the teeth being especially regular and beautiful. But notwithstanding their beauty, it struck me that on the whole, I had never seen a more evil-looking set of faces. There was an aspect of cold and sullen cruelty stamped upon them that revolted me, and which in some cases was almost uncanny in its intensity. Another thing that struck me about them was that they never seemed to smile. Sometimes they sang the monotonous song of which I have spoken, but when they were not singing they remained almost perfectly silent, and the light of a laugh never came to brighten their somber and evil countenances. Of what race could these people be? Their language was a bastard Arabic, and yet they were not Arabs. I was quite sure of that. For one thing they were too dark, or rather yellow. I could not say why, but I know that their appearance filled me with a sick fear of which I felt ashamed. While I was still wondering, another litter came up alongside of mine. In it, for the curtains were drawn, sat an old man, clothed in a whitish robe, made apparently from coarse linen, that hung loosely about him, who I at once jumped to the conclusion, was the shadowy figure that had stood on the bank and been addressed as father. He was a wonderful-looking old man, with a snowy beard, so long that the ends of it hung over the sides of the litter, and he had a hooked nose, above which flashed out a pair of eyes as keen as a snake's, while his whole countenance was instinct with a look of wise and sardonic humor impossible to describe on paper. "Art thou awake, stranger?" he said in a deep and low voice. "Surely, my father," I answered courteously, feeling certain that I should do well to conciliate this ancient mammon of unrighteousness. He stroked his beautiful white beard and smiled faintly. "From whatever country thou camest," he said. "And by the way, it must be from one where somewhat of our language is known. They teach their children courtesy there, my stranger son. And now wherefore comest thou unto this land, which scarce an alien foot has pressed from the time that man knoweth? Art thou and those with thee weary of life?" "We came to find new things," I answered boldly. "We are tired of the old things. We have come up out of the sea to know that which is unknown. We are of a brave race who fear not death, my very much respected father. That is, if we can get a little information before we die." "Humph," said the old gentleman. "That may be true. It is rash to contradict, otherwise I should say that thou wast lying, my son. However, I dare to say that she who must be obeyed will meet thy wishes in the matter." "Who is she who must be obeyed?" I asked curiously. The old man glanced at the bearers, and then answered, with a little smile that somehow sent my blood to my heart, "Surely, my stranger son, thou wilt learn soon enough, if it be her pleasure to see thee at all in the flesh." "In the flesh?" I answered. "What may my father wish to convey?" But the old man only laughed a dreadful laugh, and made no reply. "What is the name of my father's people?" I asked. "The name of my people is Haggard, the people of the rocks." "And if a son might ask, what is the name of my father?" "My name is Bilali." "And whither go we, my father?" "That shalt thou see." And at a sign from him his bearers started forward at a run till they reached the litter in which Job was reposing, with one leg hanging over the side. Apparently, however, he could not make much out of Job, for presently I saw his bearers trot forward to Leo's litter. And after that, as nothing fresh occurred, I yielded to the pleasant swaying motion of the litter, and went to sleep again. I was dreadfully tired. When I woke I found that we were passing through a rocky defile of a lava formation with precipitous sides, in which grew many beautiful trees and flowering shrubs. Presently this defile took a turn, and a lovely sight unfolded itself to my eyes. Before us was a vast cup of green from 4 to 6 miles in extent, in the shape of a Roman amphitheater. The sides of this great cup were rocky and clothed with bush, but the center was of the richest meadowland, studded with single trees of magnificent growth, and watered by meandering brooks. On this rich plain grazed herds of goats and cattle, but I saw no sheep. At first I could not imagine what this strange spot could be, but presently it flashed upon me that it must represent the crater of some long-extinct volcano which had afterwards been a lake, and was ultimately drained in some unexplained way. And here I may state that from my subsequent experience of this and a much larger, but otherwise similar spot, which I shall have occasion to describe by and by, I have every reason to believe that this conclusion was correct. What puzzled me, however, was that although there were people moving about herding the goats and cattle, I saw no signs of any human habitation. Where did they all live? I wondered. My curiosity was soon destined to be gratified. Turning to the left, the string of litters followed the cliffy sides of the crater for a distance of about half a mile, or perhaps a little less, and then halted. Seeing the old gentleman, my adopted father, Bilali, emerge from his litter, I did the same, and so did Leo and Job. The first thing I saw was our wretched Arab companion, Mohammed, lying exhausted on the ground. It appeared that he had not been provided with a litter, but had been forced to run the entire distance, and as he was already quite worn out when we started, his condition now was one of great prostration. On looking round we discovered that the place where we had halted was a platform in front of the mouth of a great cave, and piled upon this platform were the entire contents of the whaleboat, even down to the oars and sail. Round the cave stood groups of the men who had escorted us, and other men of a similar stamp. They were all tall and all handsome, though they varied in their degree of darkness of skin, some being as dark as Mohammed, and some as yellow as a Chinese. They were naked, except for the leopard skin round the waist, and each of them carried a huge spear. There were also some women among them, who instead of the leopard skin, wore a tanned hide of a small red buck, something like that of the oribe, only rather darker in color. These women were, as a class, exceedingly good-looking, with large dark eyes, well-cut features, and a thick bush of curling hair, not crisp like a Negro's, ranging from black to chestnut in hue, with all shades of intermediate color. Some, but very few of them, wore a yellowish linen garment, such as I have described as worn by Bilali, but this, as we afterwards discovered, was a mark of rank, rather than an attempt at clothing. For the rest, their appearance was not quite so terrifying as that of the men, and they sometimes, though rarely, smiled. As soon as we had alighted, they gathered round us and examined us with curiosity, but without excitement. Leo's tall, athletic form and clear-cut Grecian face, however, evidently excited their attention, and when he politely lifted his hat to them, and showed his curling yellow hair, there was a slight murmur of admiration. Nor did it stop there, for after regarding him critically from head to foot, the handsomest of the young women, one wearing a robe, and with hair of a shade between brown and chestnut, deliberately advanced to him, and in a way that would have been winning had it not been so determined, quietly put her arm round his neck, bent forward and kissed him on the lips. I gave a gasp, expecting to see Leo instantly speared, and Job ejaculated, "The hussy, well, I never." As for Leo, he looked slightly astonished, and then, remarking that we had clearly got into a country where they followed the customs of the early Christians, deliberately returned the embrace. Again I gasped, thinking that something would happen, but to my surprise, though some of the young women showed traces of vexation, the older ones and the men only smiled slightly. When we came to understand the customs of this extraordinary people, the mystery was explained. It then appeared that, in direct opposition to the habits of almost every other savage race in the world, women among the Haggard are not only upon terms of perfect equality with the men, but are not held to them by any binding ties. Descent is traced only through the line of the mother, and while individuals are as proud of a long and superior female ancestry as we are of our families in Europe, they never pay attention to, or even acknowledge, any man as their father, even when their male parentage is perfectly well known. There is but one titular male parent of each tribe, or as they call it, household, and he is its elected and immediate ruler, with the title of father. For instance, the man Bilali was the father of this household, which consisted of about 7,000 individuals all told, and no other man was ever called by that name. When a woman took a fancy to a man, she signified her preference by advancing and embracing him publicly, in the same way that this handsome and exceedingly prompt young lady, who was called Ustane, had embraced Leo. If he kissed her back, it was a token that he accepted her, and the arrangement continued until one of them wearied of it. I am bound, however, to say that the change of husbands was not nearly so frequent as might have been expected, nor did quarrels arise out of it, at least among the men, who, when their wives deserted them in favor of a rival, accepted the whole thing much as we accept the income tax or our marriage laws, as something not to be disputed, and as tending to the good of the community, however disagreeable they may in particular instances prove to the individual. It is very curious to observe how the customs of mankind on this matter vary in different countries, making morality an affair of latitude, and what is right and proper in one place wrong and improper in another. It must, however, be understood that, since all civilized nations appear to accept it as an axiom that ceremony is the touchstone of morality, there is, even according to our canons, nothing immoral about this Haggard custom, seeing that the interchange of the embrace answers to our ceremony of marriage, which, as we know, justifies most things. 7. Ustane sings. When the kissing operation was finished, by the way, none of the young ladies offered to pet me in this fashion, though I saw one hovering round Job, to that respectable individual's evident alarm. The old man Bilali advanced, and graciously waved us into the cave, whither we went, followed by Ustane, who did not seem inclined to take the hints I gave her that we liked privacy. Before we had gone 5 paces, it struck me that the cave that we were entering was none of nature's handiwork, but on the contrary had been hollowed by the hand of man. So far as we could judge, it appeared to be about 100 feet in length by 50 wide, and very lofty, resembling a cathedral aisle more than anything else. From this main aisle opened passages at a distance of every 12 or 15 feet, leading, I suppose, to smaller chambers. About 50 feet from the entrance of the cave, just where the light began to get dim, a fire was burning, which threw huge shadows upon the gloomy walls around. Here Bilali halted, and asked us to be seated, saying that the people would bring us food, and accordingly we squatted ourselves down upon the rugs of skins which were spread for us, and waited. Presently the food, consisting of goat's flesh boiled, fresh milk in an earthenware pot, and boiled cobs of Indian corn, was brought by young girls. We were almost starving, and I do not think that I ever in my life before ate with such satisfaction. Indeed, before we had finished we literally ate up everything that was set before us. When we had done, our somewhat saturnine host, Bilali, who had been watching us in perfect silence, rose and addressed us. He said that it was a wonderful thing that had happened. No man had ever known or heard of white strangers arriving in the country of the people of the rocks. Sometimes, though rarely, black men had come here, and from them they had heard of the existence of men much whiter than themselves, who sailed on the sea in ships, but for the arrival of such there was no precedent. We had, however, been seen dragging the boat up the canal, and he told us frankly that he had at once given orders for our destruction, seeing that it was unlawful for any stranger to enter here, when a message had come from she who must be obeyed, saying that our lives were to be spared, and that we were to be brought hither. Pardon me, my father, I interrupted at this point. But if, as I understand, she who must be obeyed lives yet farther off, how could she have known of our approach? Bilali turned, and seeing that we were alone, for the young lady, Ustane, had withdrawn when he had begun to speak, said with a curious little laugh, "Are there none in your land who can see without eyes and hear without ears? Ask no questions," she knew. I shrugged my shoulders at this, and he proceeded to say that no further instructions had been received on the subject of our disposal, and this being so he was about to start to interview she who must be obeyed, generally spoken of, for the sake of brevity, as Haya, or she simply, who he gave us to understand was the queen of the Haggard, and learn her wishes. I asked him how long he proposed to be away, and he said that by traveling hard he might be back on the 5th day, but there were many miles of marsh to cross before he came to where she was. He then said that every arrangement would be made for our comfort during his absence, and that, as he personally had taken a fancy to us, he sincerely trusted that the answer he should bring from she would be one favorable to the continuation of our existence, but at the same time he did not wish to conceal from us that he thought this doubtful, as every stranger who had ever come into the country during his grandmother's life, his mother's life, and his own life, had been put to death without mercy, and in a way he would not harrow our feelings by describing, and this had been done by the order of she herself. At least he supposed that it was by her order. At any rate, she never interfered to save them. "Why," I said, "but how can that be? You are an old man, and the time you talk of must reach back 3 men's lives. How therefore could she have ordered the death of anybody at the beginning of the life of your grandmother, seeing that herself she would not have been born?" Again he smiled, that same faint, peculiar smile, and with a deep bow departed, without making any answer. Nor did we see him again for 5 days. When he had gone we discussed the situation, which filled me with alarm. I did not at all like the accounts of this mysterious queen, she who must be obeyed, or more shortly she, who apparently ordered the execution of any unfortunate stranger in a fashion so unmerciful. Leo, too, was depressed about it, but consoled himself by triumphantly pointing out that this she was undoubtedly the person referred to in the writing on the potsherd and in his father's letter, in proof of which he advanced Bilali's allusions to her age and power. I was by this time too overwhelmed with the whole course of events that I had not even the heart left to dispute a proposition so absurd, so I suggested that we should try to go out and get a bath, of which we all stood sadly in need. Accordingly, having indicated our wish to a middle-aged individual of an unusually saturnine cast of countenance, even among this saturnine people, who appeared to be deputed to look after us now that the father of the hamlet had departed, we started in a body, having first lit our pipes. Outside the cave we found quite a crowd of people evidently watching for our appearance, but when they saw us come out smoking they vanished this way and that, calling out that we were great magicians. Indeed, nothing about us created so great a sensation as our tobacco smoke, not even our firearms. One after this we succeeded in reaching a stream that had its source in a strong ground spring, and taking our bath in peace, though some of the women, not excepting Ustane, showed a decided inclination to follow us even there. We found tobacco growing in this country as it does in every other part of Africa, and although they were so absolutely ignorant of its other blessed qualities, the Haggard use it habitually in the form of snuff, and also for medicinal purposes. Lh. By the time that we had finished this most refreshing bath the sun was setting. Indeed, When we got back to the big cave, it had already set. The cave itself was full of people gathered round fires, for several more had now been lighted, and eating their evening meal by their lurid light, and by that of various lamps which were set about or hung upon the walls. These lamps were of a rude manufacture of baked earthenware, and of all shapes, some of them graceful enough. The larger ones were formed of big red earthenware pots, filled with clarified melted fat, and having a reed wick stuck through a wooden disc which filled the top of the pot. This sort of lamp required the most constant attention to prevent its going out whenever the wick burnt down, as there were no means of turning it up. The smaller hand lamps, however, which were also made of baked clay, were fitted with wicks manufactured from the pith of a palm tree, or sometimes from the stem of a very handsome variety of fern. This kind of wick was passed through a round hole at the end of the lamp, to which a sharp piece of hardwood was attached wherewith to pierce and draw it up whenever it showed signs of burning low. For a while we sat down and watched this grim people eating their evening meal in silence as grim as themselves, till at length, getting tired of contemplating them and the huge moving shadows on the rocky walls, I suggested to our new keeper that we should like to go to bed. Without a word he rose, and taking me politely by the hand, advanced with a lamp to one of the small passages that I had noticed opening out of the central cave. This we followed for about 5 paces, when it suddenly widened out into a small chamber, about 8 feet square, and hewn out of the living rock. On one side of this chamber was a stone slab, about 3 feet from the ground, and running its entire length like a bunk in a cabin, and on this slab he intimated that I was to sleep. There was no window or air hole to the chamber, and no furniture. And on looking at it more closely, I came to the disturbing conclusion, in which, as I afterwards discovered, I was quite right, that it had originally served for a sepulchre for the dead rather than a sleeping place for the living, the slab being designed to receive the corpse of the departed. The thought made me shudder in spite of myself, but seeing that I must sleep somewhere, I got over the feeling as best I might, and returned to the cavern to get my blanket, which had been brought up from the boat with the other things. There I met Job, who, having been inducted to a similar apartment, had flatly declined to stop in it, saying that the look of the place gave him the horrors, and that he might as well be dead and buried in his grandfather's brick grave at once, and expressed his determination of sleeping with me if I would allow him. This, of course, I was only too glad to do. The night passed very comfortably on the whole. I say on the whole, for personally I went through a most horrible nightmare of being buried alive, induced, no doubt, by the sepulchral nature of my surroundings. At dawn we were aroused by a loud trumpeting sound, produced, as we afterwards discovered, by a young Haggard blowing through a hole bored in its side into a hollowed elephant tusk, which was kept for the purpose. Taking the hint, we got up and went down to the stream to wash, after which the morning meal was served. At breakfast one of the women, no longer quite young, advanced and publicly kissed Job. I think it was in its way the most delightful thing, putting its impropriety aside for a moment, that I ever saw. Never shall I forget the respectable Job's abject terror and disgust. Job, like myself, is a bit of a misogynist, I fancy chiefly owing to the fact of his having been one of a family of 17, and the feelings expressed upon his countenance when he realized that he was not only being embraced publicly, and without authorization on his own part, but also in the presence of his masters, were too mixed and painful to admit of accurate description. He sprang to his feet, and pushed the woman, a buxom person of about 30, from him. "Well, I never," he gasped, whereupon, probably thinking that he was only coy, she embraced him again. "Be off with you. Get away, you minx," he shouted, waving the wooden spoon, with which he was eating his breakfast, up and down before the lady's face. "Beg your pardon, gentlemen, I am sure I haven't encouraged her. Oh Lord! She's coming for me again. Hold her, Mr. Holly. Please hold her. I can't stand it, I can't indeed. This has never happened to me before, gentlemen, never. There's nothing against my character." And here he broke off, and ran as hard as he could go down the cave, and for once I saw the Haggard laugh. As for the woman, however, she did not laugh. On the contrary, she seemed to bristle with fury, which the mockery of the other women about only served to intensify. She stood there literally snarling and shaking with indignation, and seeing her, I wished Job's scruples had been at Jericho, forming a shrewd guess that his admirable behavior had endangered our throats. Nor, as the sequel shows, was I wrong. The lady having retreated, Job returned in a great state of nervousness, and keeping his weather I fixed upon every woman who came near him. I took an opportunity to explain to our hosts that Job was a married man, and had had very unhappy experiences in his domestic relations, which accounted for his presence here and his terror at the sight of women, but my remarks were received in grim silence, it being evident that our retainer's behavior was considered as a slight to the household at large, although the women, after the manner of some of their most civilized sisters, made merry at the rebuff of their companion. After breakfast we took a walk, and inspected the Haggard herds, and also their cultivated lands. They have 2 breeds of cattle, one large and angular, with no horns but yielding beautiful milk, and the other a red breed, very small and fat, excellent for meat, but of no value for milking purposes. This last breed closely resembles the Norfolk Red Poll strain, only it has horns which generally curve forward over the head, sometimes to such an extent that they have to be cut to prevent them from growing into the bones of the skull. The goats are long-haired, and are used for eating only, at least I never saw them milked. As for the Haggard cultivation, it is primitive in the extreme, being all done by means of a spade made of iron, for these people smelt and work iron. This spade is shaped more like a big spearhead than anything else, and has no shoulder to it on which the foot can be set. As a consequence, the labor of digging is very great. It is, however, all done by the men, the women, contrary to the habits of most savage races, being entirely exempt from manual toil. But then, as I think I have said elsewhere, among the Haggard the weaker sex has established its rights. At first we were much puzzled as to the origin and constitution of this extraordinary race, points upon which they were singularly uncommunicative. As the time went on, for the next 4 days passed without any striking event, we learnt something from Leo's lady friend Ustane, who, by the way, stuck to that young gentleman like his own shadow. As to origin they had none, at least, so far as she was aware. There were, however, she informed us, mounds of masonry and many pillars, near the place where she lived, which was called Kor, and which the wise said had once been houses wherein men lived, and it was suggested that they were descended from these men. No one, however, dared go near these great ruins, because they were haunted. They only looked on them from a distance. Other similar ruins were to be seen, she had heard, in various parts of the country, that is, wherever one of the mountains rose above the level of the swamp. Also the caves in which they lived had been hollowed out of the rocks by men, perhaps the same who built the cities. They themselves had no written laws, only custom, which was, however, quite as binding as law. If any man offended against the custom, he was put to death by order of the father of the household. I asked how he was put to death, and she only smiled and said that I might see one day soon. They had a queen, however. She was their queen, but she was very rarely seen, perhaps once in 2 or 3 years, when she came forth to pass sentence on some offenders, and when seen was muffled up in a big cloak, so that nobody could look upon her face. Those who waited upon her were deaf and dumb, and therefore could tell no tales, but it was reported that she was lovely as no other woman was lovely, or ever had been. It was rumored also that she was immortal, and had power over all things, but she, Ustane, could say nothing of all that. What she believed was that the queen chose a husband from time to time, and as soon as a female child was born, this husband, who was never again seen, was put to death. Then the female child grew up and took the place of the queen when its mother died, and had been buried in the great caves. But of these matters none could speak with certainty. Only she was obeyed throughout the length and breadth of the land, and to question her command was instant death. She kept a guard, but had no regular army, and to disobey her was to die. I asked what size the land was, and how many people lived in it. She answered that there were 10 households, like this that she knew of, including the big household, where the queen was, that all the households lived in caves, in places resembling this stretch of raised country, dotted about in a vast extent of swamp, which was only to be threaded by secret paths. Often the households made war on each other until she sent word that it was to stop, and then they instantly ceased. That and the fever which they caught in crossing the swamps prevented their numbers from increasing too much. They had no connection with any other race, indeed none lived near them, or were able to thread the vast swamps. Once an army from the direction of the great river, presumably the Zambesi, had attempted to attack them, but they got lost in the marshes, and at night, seeing the great balls of fire that move about there, tried to come to them, thinking that they marked the enemy camp, and half of them were drowned. As for the rest, they soon died of fever and starvation, not a blow being struck at them. The marshes, she told us, were absolutely impassable except to those who knew the paths, adding, what I could well believe, that we should never have reached this place where we then were had we not been brought thither. These and many other things we learnt from Ustane during the 4 days' pause before our real adventures began, and as may be imagined, they gave us considerable cause for thought. The whole thing was exceedingly remarkable, almost incredibly so, indeed, and the oddest part of it was that so far it did more or less correspond to the ancient writing on the sherd. And now it appeared that there was a mysterious queen clothed by rumor with dread and wonderful attributes, and commonly known by the impersonal, but to my mind, rather awesome title of she. Altogether, I could not make it out, nor could Leo, though of course he was exceedingly triumphant over me because I had persistently mocked at the whole thing. As for Job, he had long since abandoned any attempt to call his reason his own, and left it to drift upon the sea of circumstance. Mahomed, the Arab, who was, by the way, treated civilly indeed, but with chilling contempt by the Haggard, was, I discovered, in a great fright, though I could not quite make out what he was frightened about. He would sit crouched up in a corner of the cave all day long, calling upon Allah and the Prophet to protect him. When I pressed him about it, he said that he was afraid because these people were not men or women at all, but devils, and that this was an enchanted land. And upon my word, once or twice since then I have been inclined to agree with him. And so the time went on, till the night of the 4th day after Bilali had left, when something happened. We three and Ustane were sitting round a fire in the cave just before bedtime, when suddenly the woman, who had been brooding in silence, rose, and laid her hand upon Leo's golden curls, and addressed him. Even now, when I shut my eyes, I can see her proud imperial form, clothed alternately in dense shadow and the red flickering of the fire, as she stood, the wild center of as weird a scene as I ever witnessed, and delivered herself of the burden of her thoughts and forebodings in a kind of rhythmical speech that ran something as follows. Thou art my chosen. I have waited for thee from the beginning. Thou art very beautiful. Who hath hair like unto thee, or skin so white? Who hath so strong an arm? Who is so much a man? Thine eyes are the sky, and the light in them is the stars. Thou art perfect and of a happy face, and my heart turned itself towards thee. I, when mine eyes fell upon thee, I did desire thee. Then did I take thee to me, O thou beloved, and hold thee fast, lest harm should come unto thee. I did cover thine head with mine hair, lest the sun should strike it. And altogether was I thine, and thou wast altogether mine. And so it went for a little space, till time was in labor with an evil day. And then what befell on that day? Alas! My beloved, I know not. But I saw thee no more. I was lost in the blackness. And she who is stronger did take thee. She who is fairer than Ustane. Yet didst thou turn and call upon me, and let thine eyes wander in the darkness. But nevertheless, she prevailed by beauty, and led thee down horrible places. And then then my beloved. Here this extraordinary woman broke off her speech, or chant, which was so much musical gibberish to us, for all that we understood of what she was talking about, and seemed to fix her flashing eyes upon the deep shadow before her. Then in a moment they acquired a vacant, terrified stare, as though they were striving to realize some half-seen horror. She lifted her hand from Leo's head, and pointed into the darkness. We all looked, and could see nothing, but she saw something, or thought she did, and something evidently that affected even her iron nerves, for, without another sound, down she fell senseless between us. Leo, who was growing really attached to this remarkable young person, was in a great state of alarm and distress, and I, to be perfectly candid, was in a condition not far removed from superstitious fear. The whole scene was an uncanny one. Presently, however, she recovered, and sat up with an extraordinary convulsive shudder. What didst thou mean, Ustane? Asked Leo, who, thanks to years of tuition, spoke Arabic very prettily. Nay, my chosen, she answered, with a little forced laugh. I did but sing unto thee after the fashion of my people. Surely I meant nothing. How could I speak of that which is not yet? And what didst thou see, Ustane? I asked, looking her sharply in the face. Nay, she answered again, I saw not. Ask me not what I saw. Why should I fright ye? And then, turning to Leo with a look of the most utter tenderness that I ever saw upon the face of a woman, civilized or savage, she took his head between her hands, and kissed him on the forehead as a mother might. When I am gone from thee, my chosen, she said, when at night thou stretchest out thine hand and canst not find me, then shouldst thou think at times of me, for of a truth I love thee well, though I be not fit to wash thy feet. And now let us love and take that which is given us, and be happy, for in the grave there is no love and no warmth, nor any touching of the lips. Nothing perchance, or perchance but bitter memories of what might have been. Tonight the hours are our own. How know we to whom they shall belong tomorrow? 8. The feast and after. On the day following this remarkable scene, a scene calculated to make a deep impression upon anybody who beheld it, more because of what it suggested and seemed to foreshadow than of what it revealed, it was announced to us that a feast would be held that evening in our honor. I did my best to get out of it, saying that we were modest people and cared little for feasts, but my remarks being received with the silence of displeasure, I thought it wisest to hold my tongue. Accordingly, just before sundown, I was informed that everything was ready, and accompanied by Job, went into the cave where I met Leo, who was, as usual, followed by Ustane. These two had been out walking somewhere, and knew nothing of the projected festivity till that moment. When Ustane heard of it, I saw an expression of horror spring up upon her handsome features. Turning, she caught a man who was passing up the cave by the arm, and asked him something in an imperious tone. His answer seemed to reassure her a little, for she looked relieved, though far from satisfied. Next she appeared to attempt some remonstrance with the man, who was a person in authority, but he spoke angrily to her, and shook her off, and then, changing his mind, led her by the arm, and sat her down between himself and another man in the circle round the fire, and I perceived that for some reason of her own she thought it best to submit. The fire in the cave was an unusually big one that night, and in a large circle round it were gathered about 35 men and 2 women, Ustane and the woman to avoid whom Job had played the role of another scriptural character. The men were sitting in perfect silence, as was their custom, each with his great spear stuck upright behind him, in a socket cut in the rock for that purpose. Only 1 or 2 wore the yellowish linen garment of which I have spoken. The rest had nothing on except the leopard's skin about the middle. "What's up now, sir?" said Job doubtfully. "Bless us and save us, there's that woman again. Now, surely, she can't be after me, seeing that I have given her no encouragement. They give me the creeps, the whole lot of them, and that's a fact. Why look, they have asked Mahome to dine too. There, that lady of mine is talking to him in as nice and civil a way as possible. Well, I'm glad it isn't me, that's all." We looked up, and sure enough the woman in question had risen, and was escorting the wretched Mahome from his corner, where, overcome by some acute prescience of horror, he had been seated, shivering, and calling on Allah. He appeared unwilling enough to come, if for no other reason perhaps because it was an unaccustomed honor, for hitherto his food had been given to him apart. Anyway, I could see that he was in a state of great terror, for his tottering legs would scarcely support his stout, bulky form, and I think it was rather owing to the resources of barbarism behind him, in the shape of a huge Haggard with a proportionately huge spear, than to the seductions of the lady who led him by the hand, that he consented to come at all. "Well," I said to the others, "I don't at all like the look of things, but I suppose we must face it out. Have you fellows got your revolvers on? Because if so, you had better see that they are loaded." "I have, sir," said Job, tapping his Colt, "but Mr. Leo has only got his hunting knife, though that is big enough surely." Feeling that it would not do to wait while the missing weapon was fetched, we advanced boldly, and seated ourselves in a line, with our backs against the side of the cave. As soon as we were seated, an earthenware jar was passed round containing a fermented fluid, of by no means unpleasant taste, though apt to turn upon the stomach, made from crushed grain, not Indian corn, but a small brown grain that grows upon its stem in clusters, not unlike that which in the southern part of Africa is known by the name of Kaffir corn. The vase which contained this liquor was very curious, and as it more or less resembled many hundreds of others in use among the Haggard, I may as well describe it. These vases are of a very ancient manufacture, and of all sizes. None such can have been made in the country for hundreds, or rather thousands, of years. They are found in the rock tombs, of which I shall give a description in their proper place, and my own belief is that, after the fashion of the Egyptians, with whom the former inhabitants of this country may have had some connection, they were used to receive the viscera of the dead. Leo, however, is of opinion that, as in the case of Etruscan amphorae, they were placed there for the spiritual use of the deceased. They are mostly two-handled and of all sizes, some being nearly 3 feet in height, and running from that down to as many inches. In shape they vary, but all are exceedingly beautiful and graceful, being made of a very fine black ware, not lustrous but slightly rough. On this groundwork are inlaid figures much more graceful and lifelike than any others that I have seen on antique vases. Some of these inlaid pictures represent love scenes with a childlike simplicity and freedom of manner, which would not commend itself to the taste of the present day. Others again give pictures of maidens dancing, and yet others of hunting scenes. For instance, the very vase from which we were then drinking had on one side a most spirited drawing of men, apparently white in color, attacking a bull elephant with spears, while on the reverse was a picture, not quite so well done, of a hunter shooting an arrow at a running antelope. I should say from the look of it either an eland or a kudu. This is a digression at a critical moment, but it is not too long for the occasion itself was very long. With the exception of the periodical passing of the vase, and the movement necessary to throw fuel onto the fire, nothing happened for the best part of a whole hour. Nobody spoke a word. There we all sat in perfect silence, staring at the glare and glow of the large fire, and at the shadows thrown by the flickering earthenware lamps, which, by the way, were not ancient. On the open space between us and the fire lay a large wooden tray, with 4 short handles to it, exactly like a butcher's tray, only not hollowed out. By the side of the tray was a great pair of long-handled iron pincers, and on the other side of the fire was a similar pair. Somehow I did not at all like the appearance of this tray, and the accompanying pincers. There I sat and stared at them and at the silent circle of the fierce moody faces of the men, and reflected that it was all very awful, and that we were absolutely in the power of this alarming people, who to me at any rate, were all the more formidable because their true character was still very much of a mystery to us. They might be better than I thought them, or they might be worse. I feared that they were worse, and I was not wrong. It was a curious sort of a feast, I reflected, in appearance indeed, an entertainment of the Barmecide stamp, for there was absolutely nothing to eat. At last, just as I was beginning to feel as though I were being mesmerized, a move was made. Without the slightest warning, a man from the other side of the circle called out in a loud voice, "Where is the flesh that we shall eat?" Thereon everybody in the circle answered in a deep measured tone, and stretching out the right arm towards the fire as he spoke, "The flesh will come." "Is it a goat?" said the same man. "It is a goat without horns, and more than a goat, and we shall slay it," they answered with one voice, and turning half round they one and all grasped the handles of their spears with the right hand, and then simultaneously let them go. "Is it an ox?" said the man again. "It is an ox without horns, and more than an ox, and we shall slay it," was the answer, and again the spears were grasped and again let go. Then came a pause, and I noticed, with horror and a rising of the hair, that the woman next to Mahomed began to fondle him, patting his cheeks and calling him by names of endearment while her fierce eyes played up and down his trembling form. I do not know why the sight frightened me so, but it did frighten us all dreadfully, especially Leo. The caressing was so snake-like, and so evidently a part of some ghastly formula that had to be gone through. I saw Mahomed turn white under his brown skin, sickly white with fear. We afterwards learnt that its object was to pretend to the victim that he was the object of love and admiration, and so to soothe his injured feelings, and cause him to expire in a happy and contented frame of mind. H. "Is the meat ready to be cooked?" asked the voice more rapidly. "It is ready, it is ready." "Is the pot hot to cook it?" it continued, in a sort of scream that echoed painfully down the great recesses of the cave. "It is hot, it is hot." "Great heavens!" roared Leo. "Remember the writing. The people who place pots upon the heads of strangers." As he said the words, before we could stir, or even take the matter in, 2 great ruffians jumped up, and seizing the long pincers, thrust them into the heart of the fire, and the woman who had been caressing Mahone suddenly produced a fiber noose from under her girdle or mucha, and slipping it over his shoulders, ran it tight, while the men next to him seized him by the legs. The two men with the pincers gave a heave, and scattering the fire this way and that upon the rocky floor, lifted from it a large earthenware pot, heated to a white heat. In an instant, almost with a single movement, they had reached the spot where Mahone was struggling. He fought like a fiend, shrieking in the abandonment of his despair, and notwithstanding the noose round him, and the efforts of the men who held his legs, the advancing wretches were for the moment unable to accomplish their purpose, which, horrible and incredible as it seems, was to put the red-hot pot upon his head. I sprang to my feet with a yell of horror, and drawing my revolver fired it by a sort of instinct straight at the diabolical woman who had been caressing Mahone, and was now gripping him in her arms. The bullet struck her in the back and killed her, and to this day I am glad that it did, for, as it afterwards transpired, she had availed herself of the anthropophagus customs of the Haggard to organize the whole thing in revenge of the slight put upon her by Job. She sank down dead, and as she did so, to my terror and dismay, Mahone, by a superhuman effort, burst from his tormentors, and springing high into the air, fell dying upon her corpse. The heavy bullet from my pistol had driven through the bodies of both, at once striking down the murderess, and saving her victim from a death 100 times more horrible. It was an awful and yet a most merciful accident. For a moment there was a silence of astonishment. The Haggard had never heard the report of a firearm before, and its effects dismayed them. But the next instant a man close to us recovered himself, and seized his spear preparatory to making a lunge with it at Leo, who was the nearest to him. "Run for it!" I shouted, setting the example by starting up the cave as hard as my legs would carry me. I would have made for the open air if it had been possible, but there were men in the way, and besides, I had caught sight of the forms of a crowd of people standing out clear against the skyline beyond the entrance to the cave. Up the cave I went, and after me came the others, and after them thundered the whole crowd of cannibals, mad with fury at the death of the woman. With a bound I cleared the prostrate form of Mahone. As I flew over him I felt the heat from the red-hot pot, which was lying close by, strike upon my legs, and by its glow saw his hands, for he was not quite dead, still feebly moving. At the top of the cave was a little platform of rock 3 feet or so high by about 8 deep, on which 2 large lamps were placed at night. Whether this platform had been left as a seat, or as a raised point afterwards to be cut away when it had served its purpose as a standing place from which to carry on the excavations, I do not know, at least, I did not then. At any rate, we all 3 reached it, and jumping on it, prepared to sell our lives as dearly as we could. For a few seconds the crowd that was pressing on our heels hung back, when they saw us face round upon them. Job was on one side of the rock to the left, Leo in the center, and I to the right. Behind us were the lamps. Leo bent forward, and looked down the long lane of shadows, terminating in the fire and lighted lamps, through which the quiet forms of our would-be murderers flitted to and fro with the faint light glinting on their spears, for even their fury was silent as a bulldog's. The only other thing visible was the red-hot pot still glowing angrily in the gloom. There was a curious light in Leo's eyes, and his handsome face was set like a stone. In his right hand was his heavy hunting knife. He shifted its thong a little up his wrist, and then put his arm round me and gave me a good hug. "Goodbye, old fellow," he said. "My dear friend, my more than father. We have no chance against those scoundrels. They will finish us in a few minutes, and eat us afterwards, I suppose. Goodbye. I led you into this. I hope you will forgive me. Goodbye, Job." "God's will be done," I said, setting my teeth, as I prepared for the end. At that moment, with an exclamation, Job lifted his revolver and fired, and hit a man, not the man he had aimed at, by the way. Anything that Job shot at was perfectly safe. On they came with a rush, and I fired 2 as fast as I could, and checked them. Between us, Job and I, besides the woman, killed or mortally wounded 5 men with our pistols before they were emptied. But we had no time to reload, and they still came on in a way that was almost splendid in its recklessness, seeing that they did not know but that we could go on firing forever. A great fellow bounded up upon the platform, and Leo struck him dead with one blow of his powerful arm, sending the knife right through him. I did the same by another, but Job missed his stroke, and I saw a brawny Haggard grip him by the middle and whirl him off the rock. The knife not being secured by a thong fell from Job's hand as he did so, and by a most happy accident for him, lit upon its handle on the rock, just as the body of the Haggard, who was undermost, struck upon its point and was transfixed upon it. What happened to Job after that I am sure I do not know, but my own impression is that he lay still upon the corpse of his deceased assailant, playing possum as the Americans say. As for myself, I was soon involved in a desperate encounter with two ruffians, who luckily for me, had left their spears behind them, and for the first time in my life the great physical power with which nature has endowed me stood me in good stead. I had hacked at the head of one man with my hunting knife, which was almost as big and heavy as a short sword, with such vigor, that the sharp steel had split his skull down to the eyes, and was held so fast by it that as he suddenly fell sideways the knife was twisted right out of my hand. Then it was that the two others sprang upon me. I saw them coming, and got an arm round the waist of each, and down we all fell upon the floor of the cave together, rolling over and over. They were strong men, but I was mad with rage, and that awful lust for slaughter which will creep into the hearts of the most civilized of us when blows are flying, and life and death tremble on the turn. My arms were round the two swarthy demons, and I hugged them till I heard their ribs crack and crunch up beneath my grip. They twisted and writhed like snakes, and clawed and battered at me with their fists, but I held on, lying on my back there, so that their bodies might protect me from spear thrusts from above. I slowly crushed the life out of them, and as I did so, strange as it may seem, I thought of what the amiable head of my college at Cambridge, who is a member of the Peace Society, and my brother fellows would say if by clairvoyance they could see me, of all men, playing such a bloody game. Soon my assailants grew faint, and almost ceased to struggle. Their breath had failed them, and they were dying, but still I dared not leave them, for they died very slowly. I knew that if I relaxed my grip they would revive. The other ruffians probably thought, for we were all three lying in the shadow of the ledge, that we were all dead together. At any rate they did not interfere with our little tragedy. I turned my head, and as I lay gasping in the throes of that awful struggle, I could see that Leo was off the rock now, for the lamplight fell full upon him. He was still on his feet, but in the center of a surging mass of struggling men, who were striving to pull him down as wolves pull down a stag. Up above them towered his beautiful pale face crowned with its bright curls, for Leo is 6 feet too high, and I saw that he was fighting with a desperate abandonment and energy that was at once splendid and hideous to behold. He drove his knife through one man. They were so close to and mixed up with him that they could not get at him to kill him with their big spears, and they had no knives or sticks. The man fell, and then somehow the knife was wrenched from his hand, leaving him defenseless, and I thought the end had come. But no, with a desperate effort he broke loose from them, seized the body of the man he had just slain, and lifting it high in the air hurled it right at the mob of his assailants, so that the shock and weight of it swept some 5 or 6 of them to the earth. But in a minute they were all up again, except one, whose skull was smashed, and had once more fastened upon him. And then slowly, and with infinite labor and struggling, the wolves bore the lion down. Once even then he recovered himself, and felled an Haggard with his fist, but it was more than man could do to hold his own for long against so many, and at last he came crashing down upon the rock floor, falling as an oak falls, and bearing with him to the earth all those who clung about him. They gripped him by his arms and legs, and then cleared off his body. "A spear," cried a voice, "a spear to cut his throat, and a vessel to catch his blood." I shut my eyes, for I saw the man coming with a spear, and myself, I could not stir to Leo's help, for I was growing weak, and the 2 men on me were not yet dead, and a deadly sickness overcame me. Then suddenly there was a disturbance, and involuntarily I opened my eyes again, and looked towards the scene of murder. The girl Ustane had thrown herself on Leo's prostrate form, covering his body with her body, and fastening her arms about his neck. They tried to drag her from him, but she twisted her legs round his, and hung on like a bulldog, or rather like a creeper to a tree, and they could not. Then they tried to stab him in the side without hurting her, but somehow she shielded him, and he was only wounded. At last they lost patience. "Drive the spear through the man and the woman together," said a voice, the same voice that had asked the questions at that ghastly feast. "So of a verity shall they be wed." Then I saw the man with the weapon straighten himself for the effort. I saw the cold steel gleam on high, and once more I shut my eyes. As I did so I heard the voice of a man thunder out in tones that rang and echoed down the rocky ways. Cease. Then I fainted, and as I did so it flashed through my darkening mind that I was passing down into the last oblivion of death. 9. A little foot. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying on a skin mat not far from the fire round which we had been gathered for that dreadful feast. Near me lay Leo, still apparently in a swoon, and over him was bending the tall form of the girl Ustane, who was washing a deep spear wound in his side with cold water preparatory to binding it up with linen. Leaning against the wall of the cave behind her was Job, apparently uninjured, but bruised and trembling. On the other side of the fire, tossed about this way and that, as though they had thrown themselves down to sleep in some moment of absolute exhaustion, were the bodies of those whom we had killed in our frightful struggle for life. I counted them. There were 12 besides the woman, and the corpse of poor Mahomed, who had died by my hand, which, the fire-stained pot at its side, was placed at the end of the irregular line. To the left a body of men were engaged in binding the arms of the survivors of the cannibals behind them, and then fastening them 2 and 2. The villains were submitting with a look of sulky indifference upon their faces which accorded ill with the baffled fury that gleamed in their somber eyes. In front of these men directing the operations, stood no other than our friend Bilali, looking rather tired, but particularly patriarchal with his flowing beard, and as cool and unconcerned as though he were superintending the cutting up of an ox. Presently he turned, and perceiving that I was sitting up advanced to me, and with the utmost courtesy said that he trusted that I felt better. I answered that at present I scarcely knew how I felt, except that I ached all over. Then he bent down and examined Leo's wound. It is an evil cut, he said, but the spear has not pierced the entrails. He will recover. Thanks to thy arrival, my father, I answered. In another minute we should all have been beyond the reach of recovery, for those devils of thine would have slain us as they would have slain our servant. And I pointed towards Mahomed. The old man ground his teeth, and I saw an extraordinary expression of malignity light up his eyes. Fear not, my son, he answered. Vengeance shall be taken on them such as would make the flesh twist upon the bones merely to hear of it. To she shall they go, and her vengeance shall be worthy of her greatness. That man, pointing to Mahomed, I tell thee that man would have died a merciful death to the death these hyena men shall die. Tell me, I pray of thee, how it came about. In a few words I sketched what had happened. Ah, so, he answered. Thou sayest, my son, here there is a custom that if a stranger comes into this country he may be slain by the pot, and eaten. It is hospitality turned upside down, I answered feebly. In our country we entertain a stranger, and give him food to eat. Here ye eat him, and are entertained. It is a custom, he answered with a shrug. Myself I think it an evil one, but then, he added by an afterthought, I do not like the taste of strangers, especially after they have wandered through the swamps and lived on wildfowl. When she who must be obeyed sent orders that ye were to be saved alive, she said naught of the black man, therefore, being hyenas, these men lusted after his flesh, and the woman it was, whom thou didst rightly slay, who put it into their evil hearts to hot-pot him. Well, they will have their reward. Better for them would it be if they had never seen the light, than that they should stand before she in her terrible anger. Happy are those of them who died by your hands. Ah, he went on, it was a gallant fight that ye fought. Knowest thou that, long-armed old baboon that thou art, thou hast crushed in the ribs of those 2 who are laid out there as though they were but as the shell on an egg? And the young one, the lion, it was a beautiful stand that he made, 1 against so many, 3 did he slay outright, and that one there. And he pointed to a body that was still moving a little. Will die anon, for his head is cracked across, and others of those who are bound are hurt. It was a gallant fight, and thou and he have made a friend of me by it, for I love to see a well-fought fray. But tell me, my son, the baboon, and now I think of it, thy face too, is hairy and altogether like a baboon's. How is it that ye slew those with a hole in them? Ye made a noise, they say, and slew them. They fell down on the faces at the noise. I explained to him as well as I could, but very shortly, for I was terribly wearied, and only persuaded to talk at all through fear of offending one so powerful if I refused to do so. What were the properties of gunpowder? and he instantly suggested that I should illustrate what I said by operating on the person of one of the prisoners. One, he said, never would be counted, and it would not only be very interesting to him, but would give me the opportunity of an installment of revenge. He was greatly astounded when I told him that it was not our custom to avenge ourselves in cold blood, and that we left vengeance to the law and a higher power, of which he knew nothing. I added, however, that when I recovered I would take him out shooting with us, and he should kill an animal for himself, and at this he was as pleased as a child at the promise of a new toy. Just then Leo opened his eyes beneath the stimulus of some brandy, of which we still had a little, that Job had poured down his throat, and our conversation came to an end. After this we managed to get Leo, who was in a very poor way indeed, and only half conscious, safely off to bed, supported by Job and that brave girl Ustane, to whom, had I not been afraid that she might resent it, I would certainly have given a kiss for her splendid behavior in saving my boy's life at the risk of her own. But Ustane was not the sort of young person with whom one would care to take liberties unless one were perfectly certain that they would not be misunderstood, so I repressed my inclinations. Then, bruised and battered, but with a sense of safety in my breast to which I had for some days been a stranger, I crept off to my own little sepulchre, not forgetting before I laid down in it to thank Providence from the bottom of my heart that it was not a sepulchre indeed, as save for a merciful combination of events that I can only attribute to its protection, it would certainly have been for me that night. Few men have been nearer their end, and yet escaped it than we were on that dreadful day. I am a bad sleeper at the best of times, and my dreams that night when at last I got to rest were not of the pleasantest. The awful vision of poor Mahone struggling to escape the red-hot pot would haunt them, and then in the background, as it were, a veiled form was always hovering, which from time to time seemed to draw the coverings from its body, revealing now the perfect shape of a lovely blooming woman, and now again the white bones of a grinning skeleton, and which, as it veiled and unveiled, uttered the mysterious and apparently meaningless sentence, "That which is alive and hath known death, and that which is dead yet can never die, for in the circle of the spirit life is not and death is not. Yea, all things live forever, though at times they sleep and are forgotten." The morning came at last, but when it came I found that I was too stiff and sore to rise. About 7 Job arrived, limping terribly, and with his face the color of a rotten apple, and told me that Leo had slept fairly, but was very weak. 2 hours afterwards Bilali, Job called him Billy Goat, to which, indeed, his white beard gave him some resemblance, or more familiarly, Billy, came too, bearing a lamp in his hand, his towering form reaching nearly to the roof of the little chamber. I pretended to be asleep, and through the cracks of my eyelids watched his sardonic but handsome old face. He fixed his hawk-like eyes upon me, and stroked his glorious white beard, which, by the way, would have been worth 100 a year to any London barber as an advertisement. "Ah!" I heard him mutter. Bilali had a habit of muttering to himself. "He is ugly, ugly as the other is beautiful, a very baboon." It was a good name. But I liked the man. Strange now, at my age, that I should like a man. What says the proverb? "Mistrust all men, and slay him whom thou mistrustest overmuch. And as for women, flee from them, for they are evil, and in the end will destroy thee." It is a good proverb, especially the last part of it. I think that it must have come down from the ancients. Nevertheless, I like this baboon, and I wonder where they taught him his tricks, and I trust that she will not bewitch him. Poor baboon. He must be wearied after that fight. I will go lest I should awake him. I waited till he had turned and was nearly through the entrance, walking softly on tiptoe, and then I called after him. "My father," I said, "is it thou?" "Yes, my son, it is I, but let me not disturb thee. I did but come to see how thou didst fare, and to tell thee that those who would have slain thee, my baboon, are by now far on their road to She. She said that ye also were to come at once, but I fear ye cannot yet." "Nay," I said, "not till we have recovered a little, but have me borne out into the daylight, I pray thee, my father. I love not this place." "Ah no," he answered, "it hath a sad air. I remember when I was a boy I found the body of a fair woman lying where thou liest now, yes, on that very bench. She was so beautiful that I was wont to creep in hither with a lamp and gaze upon her. Had it not been for her cold hands, almost could I think that she slept and would one day awake, so fair and peaceful was she in her robes of white. White was she too, and her hair was yellow and lay down her almost to the feet. There are many such still in the tombs at the place where she is, for those who set them there had a way I know not of, whereby to keep their beloved out of the crumbling hand of decay, even when death had slain them. Aye, day by day I came hither, and gazed on her till at last, laugh not at me, stranger, for I was but a silly lad. I learned to love that dead form, that shell which once had held a life that no more is. I would creep up to her and kiss her cold face, and wonder how many men had lived and died since she was, and who had loved her and embraced her in the days that long had passed away. And my baboon, I think I learned wisdom from that dead one, for of a truth it taught me of the littleness of life, and the length of death, and how all things that are under the sun go down one path, and are forever forgotten. And so I mused, and it seemed to me that wisdom flowed into me from the dead, till one day my mother, a watchful woman, but hasty-minded, seeing I was changed, followed me, and saw the beautiful white one, and feared that I was bewitched, as indeed I was. So half in dread, and half in anger, she took up the lamp, and standing the dead woman up against the wall even there, set fire to her hair, and she burnt fiercely, even down to the feet, for those who are thus kept burn excellently well. See, my son, there on the roof is yet the smoke of her burning. I looked up doubtfully, and there, sure enough, on the roof of the sepulchre, was a peculiarly unctuous and sooty mark, 3 feet or more across. Doubtless it had in the course of years been rubbed off the sides of the little cave, but on the roof it remained, and there was no mistaking its appearance. She burnt, he went on in a meditative way, even to the feet, but the feet I came back and saved, cutting the burnt bone from them, and hid them under the stone bench there, wrapped up in a piece of linen. Surely, I remember it as though it were but yesterday. Perchance they are there, if none have found them, even to this hour. Of a truth I have not entered this chamber from that time to this very day. Stay, I will look. And kneeling down, he groped about with his long arm in the recess under the stone bench. Presently his face brightened, and with an exclamation he pulled something forth which was caked in dust, which he shook onto the floor. It was covered with the remains of a rotting rag, which he undid, and revealed to my astonished gaze a beautifully shaped and almost white woman's foot, looking as fresh and firm as though it had but now been placed there. Thou sayest, my son the baboon, he said in a sad voice. I spake the truth to thee, for here is yet 1 foot remaining. Take it, my son, and gaze upon it. I took this cold fragment of mortality in my hand, and looked at it in the light of the lamp with feelings which I cannot describe, so mixed up were they between astonishment, fear, and fascination. It was light, much lighter I should say than it had been in the living state, and the flesh to all appearance was still flesh, though about it there clung a faintly aromatic odor. For the rest it was not shrunk or shriveled, or even black and unsightly, like the flesh of Egyptian mummies, but plump and fair, and except where it had been slightly burnt, perfect as on the day of death, a very triumph of embalming. Poor little foot! I set it down upon the stone bench where it had lain for so many thousand years, and wondered whose was the beauty that it had upborne through the pomp and pageantry of a forgotten civilization. First as a merry child's, then as a blushing maid's, and lastly as a perfect woman's. Through what halls of life had its soft step echoed, and in the end, with what courage had it trodden down the dusty ways of death? To whose side had it stolen in the hush of night when the black slave slept upon the marble floor? And who had listened for its stealing? Shapely little foot! Well might it have been set upon the proud neck of a conqueror bent at last to woman's beauty, and well might the lips of nobles and of kings have been pressed upon its jeweled whiteness. I wrapped up this relic of the past in the remnants of the old linen rag which had evidently formed a portion of its owner's grave clothes, for it was partially burnt, and put it away in my Gladstone bag. A strange combination, I thought. Then with Bilali's help I staggered off to see Leo. I found him dreadfully bruised, worse even than myself, perhaps owing to the excessive whiteness of his skin, and faint and weak with the loss of blood from the flesh wound in his side, but for all that cheerful as a cricket, and asking for some breakfast. Job and Ustane got him on to the bottom, or rather the sacking of a litter, which was removed from its pole for that purpose, and with the aid of old Bilali carried him out into the shade at the mouth of the cave, from which, by the way, every trace of the slaughter of the previous night had now been removed, and there we all breakfasted, and indeed spent that day, and most of the 2 following ones. on the third morning job and myself were practically recovered. Leo also was so much better that I yielded to Bilali's often expressed entreaty, and agreed to start at once upon our journey to Kor, which we were told was the name of the place where the mysterious she lived, though I still feared for its effect upon Leo, and especially lest the motion should cause his wound, which was scarcely skinned over, to break open again. Indeed, had it not been for Bilali's evident anxiety to get off, which led us to suspect that some difficulty or danger might threaten us if we did not comply with it, I would not have consented to go. Speculations. Within an hour of our finally deciding to start, 5 litters were brought up to the door of the cave, each accompanied by 4 regular bearers and 2 spare hands, also a band of about 50 armed Haggard, who were to form the escort and carry the baggage. 3 of these litters, of course, were for us, and 1 for Bilali, who, I was immensely relieved to hear, was to be our companion, while the 5th I presumed was for the use of Ustane. "Does the lady go with us, my father?" I asked of Bilali, as he stood superintending things in general. He shrugged his shoulders as he answered, "If she wills. In this country the women do what they please. We worship them, and give them their way, because without them the world could not go on. They are the source of life." "Ah," I said, the matter never having struck me quite in that light before. "We worship them," he went on, "up to a point, till at last they get unbearable, which," he added, "they do about every second generation." "And then what do you do?" I asked, with curiosity. "Then," he answered, with a faint smile, "we rise and kill the old ones as an example to the young ones, and to show them that we are the strongest. My poor wife was killed in that way 3 years ago. It was very sad, but to tell thee the truth, my son, life has been happier since, for my age protects me from the young ones." "In short," I replied, quoting the saying of a great man whose wisdom has not yet lightened the darkness of the Haggard, "thou hast found thy position one of greater freedom and less responsibility." This phrase puzzled him a little at first from its vagueness, though I think my translation hit off its sense very well, but at last he saw it, and appreciated it. "Yes, yes, my baboon," he said, "I see it now, but all the responsibilities are killed, at least some of them are, and that is why there are so few old women about just now. Well, they brought it on themselves. As for this girl," he went on in a graver tone, "I know not what to say. She is a brave girl, and she loves the lion Leo. Thou sawest how she clung to him, and saved his life. Also she is, according to our custom, wed to him, and has a right to go where he goes unless," he added significantly, "she would say her no, for her word overrides all rights." "And if she bade her leave him, and the girl refused? What then?" "If," he said with a shrug, "the hurricane bids the tree to bend, and it will not, what happens?" And then, without waiting for an answer, he turned and walked to his litter, and in 10 minutes from that time we were all well under way. It took us an hour and more to cross the cup of the volcanic plain, and another half-hour or so to climb the edge on the farther side. Once there, however, the view was a very fine one. Before us was a long steep slope of grassy plain, broken here and there by clumps of trees mostly of the thorn tribe. At the bottom of this gentle slope, some 9 or 10 miles away, we could make out a dim sea of marsh, over which the foul vapors hung like smoke about a city. It was easy going for the bearers down the slopes, and by midday we had reached the borders of the dismal swamp. Here we halted to eat our midday meal, and then, following a winding and devious path, plunged into the morass. Presently the path, at any rate to our unaccustomed eyes, grew so faint as to be almost indistinguishable from those made by the aquatic beasts and birds, and it is to this day a mystery to me how our bearers found their way across the marshes. Ahead of the cavalcade marched 2 men with long poles, which they now and again plunged into the ground before them, the reason of this being that the nature of the soil frequently changed from causes with which I am not acquainted, so that places which might be safe enough to cross one month would certainly swallow the wayfarer the next. Never did I see a more dreary and depressing scene. Miles on miles of quagmire, varied only by bright green strips of comparatively solid ground, and by deep and sullen pools fringed with tall rushes, in which the bitterns boomed and the frogs croaked incessantly. Miles on miles of it without a break, unless the fever fog can be called a break. The only life in this great morass was that of the aquatic birds. and the animals that fed on them, of both of which there were vast numbers. Geese, cranes, ducks, teal, coot, snipe, and plover swarmed all around us, many being of varieties that were quite new to me, and all so tame that one could almost have knocked them over with a stick. Among these birds I especially noticed a very beautiful variety of painted snipe, almost the size of a woodcock, and with a flight more resembling that bird's than an English snipe's. In the pools, too, was a species of small alligator or enormous iguana, I do not know which, that fed, Bilali told me, upon the waterfowl, also large quantities of a hideous black water snake, of which the bite is very dangerous, though not, I gathered, so deadly as a cobra's or a puff adder's. The bullfrogs were also very large, and with voices proportionate to their size, and as for the mosquitoes, the musketeers, as Job called them, they were, if possible, even worse than they had been on the river, and tormented us greatly. Undoubtedly, however, the worst feature of the swamp was the awful smell of rotting vegetation that hung about it, which was at times positively overpowering, and the malarious exhalations that accompanied it, which we were of course obliged to breathe. On we went through it all, till at last the sun sank in sullen splendor just as we reached a spot of rising ground about 2 acres in extent, a little oasis of dry in the midst of the miry wilderness, where Bilali announced that we were to camp. The camping, however, turned out to be a very simple process, and consisted, in fact, in sitting down on the ground round a scanty fire made of dry reeds, and some wood that had been brought with us. However, we made the best we could of it, and smoked and ate with such appetite as the smell of damp, stifling heat would allow, for it was very hot on this low land, and yet, oddly enough, chilly at times. But however hot it was, we were glad enough to keep near the fire, because we found that the mosquitoes did not like the smoke. Presently we rolled ourselves up in our blankets and tried to go to sleep, but so far as I was concerned the bullfrogs, and the extraordinary roaring and alarming sound produced by hundreds of snipe hovering high in the air, made sleep an impossibility, to say nothing of our other discomforts. I turned and looked at Leo, who was next me. He was dozing, but his face had a flushed appearance that I did not like, and by the flickering firelight I saw Ustane, who was lying on the other side of him, raise herself from time to time upon her elbow, and look at him anxiously enough. However, I could do nothing for him, for we had all already taken a good dose of quinine, which was the only preventive we had. So I lay and watched the stars come out by thousands, till all the immense arch of heaven was strewn with glittering points, and every point a world. Here was a glorious sight by which man might well measure his own insignificance. Soon I gave up thinking about it, for the mind wearies easily when it strives to grapple with the infinite, and to trace the footsteps of the Almighty as he strides from sphere to sphere, or deduce his purpose from his works. Such things are not for us to know. Knowledge is to the strong, and we are weak. Too much wisdom would perchance blind our imperfect sight, and too much strength would make us drunk, and overweight our feeble reason till it fell, and we were drowned in the depths of our own vanity. For what is the first result of man's increased knowledge interpreted from nature's book by the persistent effort of his purblind observation? Is it not but too often to make him question the existence of his Maker, or indeed of any intelligent purpose beyond his own? The truth is veiled, because we could no more look upon her glory than we can upon the sun. It would destroy us. Full knowledge is not for man as man is here, for his capacities, which he is apt to think so great, are indeed but small. The vessel is soon filled, and were 1,000th part of the unutterable and silent wisdom that directs the rolling of those shining spheres, and the force which makes them roll, pressed into it, it would be shattered into fragments. Perhaps in some other place and time it may be otherwise, who can tell? Here the lot of man born of the flesh is but to endure midst toil and tribulation, to catch at the bubbles blown by fate, which he calls pleasure, thankful if before they burst they rest a moment in his hand, and when the tragedy is played out, and his hour comes to perish, to pass humbly whither he knows not. Above me, as I lay, shone the eternal stars, and there at my feet the impish marsh-born balls of fire rolled this way and that, vapor-tossed and earth-desiring. And methought that in the two I saw a type and image of what man is, and what perchance man may one day be, if the living force who ordained him and them should so ordain this also. Oh, that it might be ours to rest year by year upon that high level of the heart to which at times we momentarily attain. Oh, that we could shake loose the prisoned pinions of the soul and soar to that superior point, whence, like to some traveler looking out through space from Darien's giddiest peak, we might gaze with spiritual eyes deep into infinity. What would it be to cast off this earthy robe, to have done forever with these earthy thoughts and miserable desires? No longer, like those corpse candles, to be tossed this way and that, by forces beyond our control, or which, if we can theoretically control them, we are at times driven by the exigencies of our nature to obey. Yes, to cast them off, to have done with the foul and thorny places of the world. And like to those glittering points above me, to rest on high wrapped forever in the brightness of our better selves, that even now shines in us as fire faintly shines within those lurid balls, and lay down our littleness in that wide glory of our dreams, that invisible but surrounding good, from which all truth and beauty comes. These and many such thoughts passed through my mind that night. They come to torment us all at times. I say to torment, for alas, thinking can only serve to measure out the helplessness of thought. What is the purpose of our feeble crying in the awful silences of space? Can our dim intelligence read the secrets of that star-strewn sky? Does any answer come out of it? Never any at all, nothing but echoes and fantastic visions. And yet we believe that there is an answer, and that upon a time a new dawn will come blushing down the ways of our enduring night. We believe it, for its reflected beauty even now shines up continually in our hearts from beneath the horizon of the grave, and we call it hope. Without hope we should suffer moral death, and by the help of hope we yet may climb to heaven, or at the worst, if she also prove but a kindly mockery given to hold us from despair, be gently lowered into the abysses of eternal sleep. Then I fell to reflecting upon the undertaking on which we were bent, and what a wild one it was, and yet how strangely the story seemed to fit in with what had been written centuries ago upon the sherd. Who was this extraordinary woman, queen over a people apparently as extraordinary as herself, and reigning amidst the vestiges of a lost civilization? And what was the meaning of this story of the fire that gave unending life? Could it be possible that any fluid or essence should exist which might so fortify these fleshy walls that they should from age to age resist the mines and batterings of decay? It was possible, though not probable. The infinite continuation of life would not, as poor Vinci said, be so marvelous a thing as the production of life and its temporary endurance. And if it were true, what then? The person who found it could no doubt rule the world. He could accumulate all the wealth in the world, and all the power, and all the wisdom that is power. He might give a lifetime to the study of each art or science. Well, if that were so, and this she were practically immortal, which I did not for one moment believe, how was it that, with all these things at her feet, she preferred to remain in a cave amongst a society of cannibals? This surely settled the question. The whole story was monstrous, and only worthy of the superstitious days in which it was written. At any rate, I was very sure that I would not attempt to attain unending life. I had had far too many worries and disappointments and secret bitternesses during my 40-odd years of existence to wish that this state of affairs should be continued indefinitely. And yet I suppose that my life has been, comparatively speaking, a happy one. And then, reflecting that at the present moment there was far more likelihood of our earthly careers being cut exceedingly short than of their being unduly prolonged, I at last managed to get to sleep, a fact for which anybody who reads this narrative, if anybody ever does, may very probably be thankful. When I woke again it was just dawning, and the garden bearers were moving about like ghosts through the dense morning mists, getting ready for our start. The fire had died quite down, and I rose and stretched myself, shivering in every limb from the damp cold of the dawn. Then I looked at Leo. He was sitting up, holding his hands to his head, and I saw that his face was flushed and his eye bright, and yet yellow round the pupil. "Well, Leo," I said, "how do you feel?" "I feel as though I were going to die," he answered hoarsely. "My head is splitting, my body is trembling, and I am as sick as a cat." I whistled. Or if I did not whistle I felt inclined to. Leo had got a sharp attack of fever. I went to Job, and asked him for the quinine, of which fortunately we had still a good supply, only to find that Job himself was not much better. He complained of pains across the back, and dizziness, and was almost incapable of helping himself. Then I did the only thing it was possible to do under the circumstances, gave them both about 10 grains of quinine, and took a slightly smaller dose myself as a matter of precaution. After that I found Bilali, and explained to him how matters stood, asking at the same time what he thought had best be done. He came with me, and looked at Leo and Job, whom by the way he had named the pig on account of his fatness, round face and small eyes. "Ah," he said, when we were out of earshot, "the fever. I thought so. The lion has it badly, but he is young, and he may live. As for the pig, his attack is not so bad. It is the little fever which he has, that always begins with pains across the back. It will spend itself upon his fat." "Can they go on, my father?" I asked. "Nay, my son, they must go on. If they stop here they will certainly die. Also, they will be better in the litters than on the ground. By tonight, if all goes well, we shall be across the marsh and in good air. Come, let us lift them into the litters and start, for it is very bad to stand still in this morning fog. We can eat our meal as we go." This we accordingly did, and with a heavy heart I once more set out upon our strange journey. For the first 3 hours all went as well as could be expected, and then an accident happened that nearly lost us the pleasure of the company of our venerable friend Bilali, whose litter was leading the cavalcade. We were going through a particularly dangerous stretch of quagmire, in which the bearers sometimes sank up to their knees. Indeed, it was a mystery to me how they contrived to carry the heavy litters at all over such ground as that which we were traversing, though the 2 spare hands, as well as the 4 regular ones, had of course to put their shoulders to the pole. Presently, as we blundered and floundered along, there was a sharp cry, then a storm of exclamations, and last of all, a most tremendous splash, and the whole caravan halted. I jumped out of my litter and ran forward. About 20 yards ahead was the edge of one of those sullen peaty pools of which I have spoken, the path we were following running along the top of its bank, that as it happened, was a steep one. Looking towards this pool, to my horror I saw that Bilali's litter was floating on it, and as for Bilali himself, he was nowhere to be seen. To make matters clear I may as well explain at once what had happened. One of Bilali's bearers had unfortunately trodden on a basking snake, which had bitten him in the leg, whereon he had, not unnaturally, let go of the pole, and then, finding that he was tumbling down the bank, grasped at the litter to save himself. The result of this was what might have been expected. The litter was pulled over the edge of the bank, the bearers let go, and the whole thing, including Bilali and the man who had been bitten, rolled into the slimy pool. When I got to the edge of the water neither of them were to be seen. Indeed, the unfortunate bearer never was seen again. Either he struck his head against something, or got wedged in the mud, or possibly the snake bite paralyzed him. At any rate he vanished. But though Bilali was not to be seen, his whereabouts was clear enough from the agitation of the floating litter, in the bearing cloth and curtains of which he was entangled. "He is there. Our father is there," said one of the men, but he did not stir a finger to help him, nor did any of the others. They simply stood and stared at the water. "Out of the way, you brutes!" I shouted in English, and throwing off my hat I took a run and sprang well out into the horrid slimy-looking pool. A couple of strokes took me to where Bilali was struggling beneath the cloth. Somehow, I do not quite know how, I managed to push it free of him, and his venerable head all covered with green slime, like that of a yellowish bacchus with ivy leaves, emerged upon the surface of the water. The rest was easy, for Bilali was an eminently practical individual, and had the common sense not to grasp hold of me as drowning people often do. So I got him by the arm, and towed him to the bank, through the mud of which we were with difficulty dragged. Such a filthy spectacle as we presented I have never seen before or since, and it will perhaps give some idea of the almost superhuman dignity of Bilali's appearance when I say that coughing, half-drowned, and covered with mud and green slime as he was, with his beautiful beard coming to a dripping point, like a Chinaman's freshly oiled pigtail, he still looked venerable and imposing. "Ye dogs," he said, addressing the bearers, as soon as he had sufficiently recovered to speak, "ye left me, your father, to drown. Had it not been for this stranger, my son the baboon, assuredly I should have drowned. Well, I will remember it." And he fixed them with his gleaming though slightly watery eye, in a way I saw that they did not like, though they tried to appear sulkily indifferent. "As for thee, my son," the old man went on, turning towards me and grasping my hand, "rest assured that I am thy friend through good and evil. Thou hast saved my life. Perchance a day may come when I shall save thine." After that we cleaned ourselves as best we could, fished out the litter, and went on, minus the man who had been drowned. I do not know if it was owing to his being an unpopular character, or from native indifference and selfishness of temperament, but I am bound to say that nobody seemed to grieve much over his sudden and final disappearance, unless, perhaps, it was the men who had to do his share of the work.